was originally an unruly, wild black beauty. Yet, for the sake of a spy mission, he forcibly disguised himself as a plain-looking, refined scumbag. And very soon, he would run headfirst into his natural enemy, the playful, devil-may-care murderer. The story begins when Gwon Taek-ju receives a mysterious assignment. Gwon Taek-ju is a top agent, but he's too defiant, refuses control, and doesn't follow orders. Even so, a top-secret, extremely difficult mission still gets dumped onto his shoulders. There is only one reason. The previous American agent died in a bizarre way. The higher-ups had no choice and could only hand this mission to him. And he must obtain the data on the new weapon jointly developed by North Korea and the Russian Bear. Besides that, his superiors keep reminding him over and over again. No matter what, he must avoid that lunatic from the Russian Bear, Bogyud Nofyu. That man is called the nuclear weapon of the Russian Bear, like a nuclear bomb. Even if you run into him in Russia, you must not confront him head-on. This, instead, piqued Gwon Taek-ju's curiosity. What kind of person would actually be called a nuclear weapon? But he never imagined that before he met the nuclear weapon, he would first encounter another madman. That madman killed someone barehanded right in front of him. The scene so gory it sent a chill down his spine. Yet the madman acted as if nothing had happened, calm and composed, the corners of his lips lifting in a slight smile. From that day on, this man began to pester him relentlessly. And at this moment, Gwon Taek-ju has not yet foreseen that he is going to be entangled. He was currently disguised as an employee of an energy company, preparing to head to Moscow. But just as the plane was about to land, a sudden commotion broke out in the aisle. Gwon Taek-ju didn't think much of it, turned around and went into the restroom, lowering his head to check the human skin mask on his face. He had to make sure the mission was watertight. But at that moment, the noise outside only grew louder. Gwon Taek-ju frowned and pulled the door open. A foreigner drunk out of control stumbled straight in. The man lay on the floor, unable to get up, yet still cursing and stubbornly refusing the flight attendants' help. The attendants had no choice but to contact the captain and suggest an emergency landing at the nearest airport. Gwon Taek-ju's heart instantly went erratic. Once they made an unscheduled landing, the airport would definitely recheck all registrations, and the likelihood of him being exposed would shoot straight up. At that thought, his eyes went cold, and he suddenly yanked the drunk up. The lavatory door was locked from the inside. The drunk, swaying, stared at him and slurred, "You want to fight?" Gwon Taek-ju raised his hand and curled a finger at him, his face darkening as he advanced step by step. A few minutes later, the plane landed smoothly in Moscow. Gwon Taek-ju walked off the plane, finally letting out a breath from his chest. He had made it in one piece at last. But just then, a blond man called out to him, saying he was there to pick him up. Gwon Taek-ju immediately sensed something was wrong and refused outright. "I didn't receive any notification." The man, however, said unhurriedly, "The company only sent the notice after the plane took off." Gwon Taek-ju lowered his head and read through the text message once, and found that the other party really hadn't lied. But in the next sentence, the man suddenly brought up the incident of the drunk troublemaker on the plane. The heart Gwon Taek-ju had just managed to settle was lifted again, and his sixth sense was warning him. It was still far from the time to relax. This is a tug-of-war spy story between two equally matched, highly intelligent men. The older top's features look as if they were carved with a knife, so strikingly beautiful they hurt to look at. The way he does things hovers between right and wrong, and his combat ability is absurdly strong. His wife is a high IQ beauty with a wild edge. She moves like a black panther, calm, efficient, and dangerous. At this moment, the two have yet to meet, but Gwon Taek-ju is already entangled in trouble. Not long ago, he received a top-level espionage mission. He put on a human skin mask, masquerading as Sakamoto Kohiro of an energy company, and headed for Moscow. Yet along the way, the driver kept going around in circles. The same trash can appeared twice, and the crack in the wall had become piercingly familiar. Gwon Taek-ju immediately mocked the driver in a cold voice. "What? You got lost?" But the blonde guide only chuckled and brushed it off, saying he was overthinking it. Gwon Taek-ju stopped wasting words, pulled out a handgun, and directly ordered the two of them to stop the car. But the instant the car came to a halt, someone burst in from outside, pressing the muzzle of a gun to Gwon Taek-ju's head. The blonde guide showed a nasty smile. "Mr. Sakamoto, you'd better behave yourself." The kidnapped Gwon Taek-ju reacted in an instant. These people were targeting Sakamoto Kohiro, and since his true identity hadn't been exposed yet, he immediately fought back, his movements clean and efficient. After taking down the gunman, he yanked the tour guide over as a human shield, blocking the bullets fired from above. Gunfire erupted from the tall building, bullets pounding down like rain. At the brink of life and death, Kwon Taek-ju held his breath, calmly ordered the driver to move, and drove into an alley. And all of this was taken in completely by the mysterious man in the high-rise. The corner of the man's mouth lifted, his smile tinged with mockery. That sharp, piercing gaze was instantly caught by Kwon Taek-ju. He frowned and looked up, only catching a dark figure sweeping over the rooftop, crouched high above like a big cat. But he didn't have time to think it through. The next second, he suddenly forced the car to a halt. Then, like a panther, he dove low and dodged, avoiding the bullets from above. Riding the momentum, he charged up the nearest building. The enemy, cradling a long gun, followed closely in pursuit. Kwon Taek-ju casually yanked off his belt. Before the other man could react, he directly disarmed him and took the rifle. On the way, he struck quickly and decisively, eliminating the pursuing enemies. But just as he was getting irritated, almost out of bullets, he sensed that familiar gaze again. He judged that the other party wasn't with the same group, but he had no time to think it through. A bullet skimmed past, flying by his feet. Kwon Taek-ju no longer paused and rushed straight up to the rooftop. He ran while thinking about what to do next. Suddenly, a miserable scream came from the stairwell. What was that noise? Kwon Taek-ju immediately became alert and sidestepped to hide. Right now, the only thing he could use was a small bomb, so he clenched the microbomb in his palm. He lightened his steps and slowly approached the main door. But just then, an arm suddenly shot out from behind the door, long fingers cruelly piercing through the enemy's eyes. Kwon Taek-ju froze on the spot, staring wide-eyed at the scene. The man whose eyes were pierced fell straight off the rooftop. A tall, dark figure approached step by step. Kwon Taek-ju held his breath, his mind racing. This person was a full 2 meters tall, and this person was exactly the owner of that strange gaze. He saw with his own eyes those long, slender fingers stab into the enemy's eyeballs once again. Blood burst out like sparks, and Kwon Taek-ju's hair instantly stood on end. He held his breath with all his might, preparing to face that man walking toward him. But the other seemed to have calculated it long ago and suddenly clamped down on his wrist. The microbomb was flung with a shake and flew straight off the rooftop. The next second, scorching flames tore through the air. Kwon Taek-ju was forcefully pinned to the ground by that mysterious man. From above came a low and lazy voice. "Your clothes are all dirty. Do you want me to help you take them off?" Cold sweat poured down Kwon Taek-ju's back, but his brain was still desperately working. This man's voice was very light, yet on his feet were $4,000 crocodile leather shoes. But before he could figure anything out, the clothes on his body were stripped off in an instant by the other man. His wrists were also cuffed to the railing. It was at this moment that he smelled a very distinctive scent. Amid the strong woody fragrance, there was a damp, sweet note. But just as he was distracted for a second, the man simply and neatly turned around and left. Kwon Taek-ju felt a tightness in his chest from anger. Unbelievably, that man had just walked away and even brazenly left the evidence at the scene. Time dragged on second by second. The cold seeped into his bones, and he was on the verge of catching a chill. The police finally arrived, and this case was classified as a kidnapping incident caused by business competition. Kwon Taek-ju's identity as a spy was not exposed. At 11 p.m., after he saw the police off, he immediately detoured to the cigar shop to investigate clues about that serial killer. The well-informed shop owner told him that the distinctive scent came from a limited edition Cuban cigar. What's more, it was basically impossible to buy on the market now, and each cigar cost $400. Kwon Taek-ju was stunned when he heard that. $4,000 leather shoes, plus cigars that cost $400 each. That man must have grown up in an environment of extreme wealth, yet had been forced into becoming a monster. A serial killer like that actually had such a refined hobby. After that, Kwon Taek-ju reported this sudden incident to Rim Bujang. A drunk troublemaker on the plane had caused a landing delay, and he was kidnapped as a result. Along the way, he had relied on his wits to get out of danger, but it was not until he ran into that serial killer that he felt true fear for the first time. In front of that man, all his fighting power seemed to be drained in an instant. Meanwhile, Rim Bujang comforted him while proposing to assign him a partner. Kwon Taek-ju didn't think much of it, nor did he expect that the person he had painstakingly been tracking would soon be so entangled with him that he couldn't shake him off. 2 days later, Kwon Taek-ju once again disguised himself as Sakamoto Kohiro. He went to attend the welcome banquet arranged by the energy company, but the boss was slow to show up. His patience was worn thin, so he had no choice but to excuse himself to go to the restroom. But just as he was planning his next move, the restroom door was pushed open by someone. A familiar voice drilled into his ears, and Gwon Taekju's heart lurched violently. He immediately realized that the person who had come was that murderer. In the strong woody scent, there was a hint of brandy, pressing straight toward him. The man hung up the phone and walked to Gwon Taekju's side, and Gwon Taekju's whole body tightened. He forced himself to appear calm, slowly turned around, and prepared to leave. But the moment his hand closed around the doorknob, a barbed sneer came from the man behind him. "Why are you leaving without saying hello?" Gwon Taekju's pupils contracted. He suddenly shoved the door open and strode out of the hall, wanting only to get out of there at once. The next second, his text message alert chimed. It was the partner profile sent by Rim Bujang. Gwon Taekju quickly tapped open the message, not noticing the shadow behind him drawing closer step by step. The familiar scent of wood instantly invaded the tip of his nose, and Gwon Taekju's heart sank. This was bad. He then heard a man's lazy voice fall from above his head. "Isn't this photo just me? A wild and handsome little spy." He welcomed the first partner of his life. That was a cynical madman who hovered between good and evil. The little spy was extremely displeased with him, all because this man had absolutely no sense of boundaries. For example, right now, the little spy was acting as usual. When he put on the human skin mask and returned to the hotel, as soon as he entered, he saw this madman had broken in without permission and was even sitting confidently in the room waiting for him. The man turned his head and gave a wicked smile. "Don't be so polite. Hurry up and come in." Gwon Taekju was so angry he felt stifled. Anyone who didn't know the situation would think this madman was the actual owner of the room. The blonde man extended his hand, smiling as he introduced himself. "My name is Jenya." When he saw that hand, Gwon Taekju instantly flashed back to the scene of him killing with his bare hands. His stomach churned, and a wave of disgust surged up. And in the 1 second he was distracted, the man, as if they were old acquaintances, reached out to touch the mask on his face. Gwon Taekju's heart gave a fierce jolt, and anger flared up in an instant. This man really had no boundaries at all. Suppressing his temper, he asked directly, "When did you start monitoring me?" Jenya did not avoid the question at all and simply admitted. He had set his sights on him from the very beginning. And if Gwon Taekju hadn't been kidnapped, he wouldn't have taken action so early, and certainly wouldn't have revealed his whereabouts ahead of time. This kind of flippant, joking attitude made Gwon Taekju even more annoyed, and he immediately shot back. "The image of gouging out someone's eyeballs with bare hands is really beautiful." Jenya did not get angry. He simply stated his thoughts calmly. He liked to make death look a bit more fun. The more Gwon Taekju listened, the more he felt that something was wrong with this guy. He was basically a lunatic. And just at that moment, it turned out to be a message from Rim Bujang. The man inside looked very much like the nuclear weapon of the Bear Country, Bordenop. Jenya merely leaned closer, glanced at the screen, then turned his head away. His expression darkened, and he solemnly warned his partner, "Don't provoke that man, because that man is very dangerous." This sentence instead made Gwon Taekju even more certain that person was Bordenop. If even a madman like Jenya called him dangerous, he could only be the number 1 lunatic of the Bear Country. Immediately after, he seized the opportunity to make a request. He wanted Jenya to help him contact those politicians in the Bear Country who were well-versed in weapons development and trafficking. Because to investigate the intelligence in the Anastasia file, he had to start with the people involved. Jenya was stunned on the spot. He hadn't expected Gwon Taekju's thinking to be this quick and this precise, cutting straight to the core of the mission in one move. Then Jenya said he was leaving, and upon hearing this, Gwon Taekju's mood actually improved. But just as he was about to close the door, a foot suddenly jammed into the gap and forcibly stopped it. The man flared up and asked coldly, "What do you think you're doing?" But Jenya just wore a wicked grin, his tone both suggestive and barbed. "Why don't we tear off our masks together and see who's really underneath?" Gwon Taekju was speechless on the spot, with only one thought left in his head. If he keeps partnering with this guy, he'll probably have a headache every single day. Straight as an arrow, Gwon Taekju had no idea that this punchable-faced man would not only bend him, but also drag his life into an even more dangerous, even more out-of-control whirlpool. Just a moment ago, Gwon Taekju had told this man to investigate the list for the 5th round of transactions in the underground market. When Jenya heard that, he froze for a second, his pupils contracting, and killing intent surged up almost instantly. He hadn't expected Gwon Taekju to latch onto the key to the mission so quickly, but on the surface he remained impassive, still walking out of the room with a perfectly calm face. In the elevator lobby, someone asked him quietly, "What do we do next?" Jenya's gaze turned icy. The corner of his lips lifted, and he gave the order in a voice utterly devoid of warmth. "Blow it up directly. Destroy the hole he's hiding in along with everything else." Early the next morning, Gwon Taek-ju put on that human skin mask. He was getting ready to have breakfast with the employees of the energy company. But when he picked up the note, he saw that written on it was, his face changed drastically, his heart sank, and he spun around and bolted outside. The moment he pulled open the hotel's front door, a thunderous roar tore through the entire building. His room and the restaurant were blown to pieces in the blink of an eye. A moment later, Gwon Taek-ju was in a complete mess, and the rescuers kindly urged him to go to the hospital for a checkup. But Gwon Taek-ju forced down his anger and said, "I'm fine." Yet the other side didn't give him any chance to refuse, directly calling over their companions to prop him up and lead him toward the rescue vehicle. Gwon Taek-ju could only pretend to be compliant while his eyes swept around, desperately looking for a chance to escape, and then he spotted a suspicious person. It was exactly the one mentioned in Rim Bujang's intel, suspected to be the #1 madman of the Bear Country, Bogdanov's man. And the previous agent was very likely killed by him. But why did he attack the hotel? Had his cover been blown? Just as Gwon Taek-ju thought of this, he saw that man already disguised as medical personnel and getting straight into the vehicle. Gwon Taek-ju's heart sank. Something's wrong. He couldn't ride in the same vehicle as this man. He shook off the people next to him and turned to run. But just as he rushed to the port, a sedan abruptly pulled up and blocked his path. The car door had just opened when he slammed it back with a punch. Immediately after, a motorcycle roared toward him. Gwon Taek-ju instantly leaned back to dodge. But the people in the sedan took the opportunity to get out and laid into him with a vicious beating. Gwon Taek-ju was beaten until his vision went black, and he couldn't help cursing in his heart. At a time like this, where the hell is Jenya? The next second, the roar of rotor blades came from overhead. From the helicopter, Jenya stared down at his wolf-like partner, wearing a wicked grin. And in the car, Bogdanov raises his hand and lifts up a small shell. At the critical moment, Gwon Taek-ju suddenly throws his arms around the man. The shell is instantly knocked off course and explodes with a huge boom in the direction of the tall building. As soon as the smoke rises, Jenya starts attacking, raking the sedan with gunfire. Gwon Taek-ju has it even worse. He's forced to dodge bullets together with the enemy, and what he's dodging are those mindless flying projectiles. The next second, the sedan loses control in its frantic escape and plunges straight into the sea. Gwon Taek-ju holds his breath and reaches for the car door, hatred chilling his heart. This lunatic Jenya. I'm still in the car, but just as he's desperately swimming upward, a hand suddenly grabs hold of him. It's Bogdanov. Blood is still seeping from his arm, clearly from a gunshot wound. Gwon Taek-ju curses inwardly. You're this badly hurt and you still want to grab me? The very next second, he stomps down viciously and kicks the other man's face away. Then he twists around and locks his arm around the man's neck, choking him until he passes out. Seizing the opening, Gwon Taek-ju shoves his enemy away and swims for the surface with all his might. But in the next instant, someone yanks him up and flings him hard onto the road. A blonde man is grinning lazily, his tone light and teasing. Looks like you're still alive. Gwon Taek-ju struggles to lift his head, his teeth grinding audibly as he sneers coldly. Sorry to disappoint. Because you showed up, I almost died. Gwon Taek-ju, who likes sexy beauties, has no idea that the man who was just trying to kill him, from the moment he saw his true colors, he started treating him as a sexy beauty, wanting to stick to him all the time. Gwon Taek-ju took care of the enemies tracking him in the sea, then turned around and struggled ashore, the human skin mask on his face already torn to shreds. Jenya smiled and pointed it out. Your face looks very strange. Gwon Taek-ju raised his hand and lightly touched his cheek, only then realizing that most of the mask had already cracked. Jenya's gaze suddenly deepened, fixing on him so intensely it made one tense up. Then he suggested, take off the mask. No matter how you looked at that gaze, it didn't seem like it belonged to a good person. Gwon Taek-ju pretended he didn't hear and just turned around to leave. But when the wind blew past, he started shivering from the cold again, his shoulders trembling uncontrollably. Cold and hungry, he couldn't help complaining. And he calls me a colleague. This guy won't even lend me his coat. Thinking this, he raised his hand to hail a taxi. But as soon as a car came close, it acted like it had seen a ghost and sped off. Behind him, Jenya couldn't hold back and burst out laughing. And Gwon Taek-ju's mood instantly worsened. Jenya still wouldn't give up and again told him to take off the mask, saying the taxi had been scared away by that face of his. But Gwon Taek-ju was still hesitating when a big hand suddenly reached over, making his heart lurch and sink. Anger flared in him, and he flung Jenya's hand away without hesitation. The blonde man suddenly leaned in close, lowered his voice and asked him, why do you always reject other people? Before the words had fully fallen, He unceremoniously tore off Kwon Taek-ju's mask. That strikingly handsome yet feral face was suddenly revealed, the sense of aggression far too strong, like a wave of heat slamming into him head-on. Jenya froze on the spot. Even his gaze stopped moving. Kwon Taek-ju, however, furrowed his brows. Why was this guy staring at him the whole time? Wasn't Jenya his partner? Had he really not looked at his photo in advance? The man wore a teasing smile, but for some reason didn't say a single word. He instead handed over a card, telling Kwon Taek-ju to find some dirt hole and hide there obediently, because the people watching him would only keep increasing. Holding the card, Kwon Taek-ju grew even more confused. A dirt hole? What on earth was that supposed to mean? Just then, the man picked up a call, said a few casual words, and hung up. Kwon Taek-ju couldn't help complaining. This guy didn't share anything. How were they supposed to be partners like this? But the man just got straight into a taxi and left without even a word of goodbye. Watching the yellow car speed away, Zhezhou yelled at the back of it in utter frustration. He couldn't believe the other man had just left like that. When the sea breeze blew over him, Kwon Taek-ju shivered with cold. He couldn't even cry. He just wanted to know where exactly he had been dumped. A madman with cruel methods, yet with a terrifyingly calm and clear mind. Once you were targeted by someone like that, you really might be forced into a corner with no way out. But having just survived that thrilling escape, the little spy Kwon Taek-ju actually didn't have the time to think that far. He was too busy complaining that the hotel was too shabby, without even any hot water. Then he flopped down on the bed and muttered in a low voice, "Finally, I can rest." Late at night, when everything was quiet, he suddenly became anxious and just couldn't calm down. Simply because today, he still hadn't called his mother to let her know he was safe. After his father and older brother left, his mother became more and more dependent on him. But he had lost his phone while on the run, and if his mother couldn't get a call, she would definitely worry. The more Kwon Taek-ju thought about it, the less he could sleep, so he simply picked up the card Jenya had given him. He got up, walked to the front desk, and made a long-distance call. After finally soothing his mother, Kwon Taek-ju was even less able to sleep, so he decided to go get something to eat. Yet the moment the food entered his mouth, he couldn't help thinking, this is way too awful. With his mood simmering with anger, the man suddenly turned superstitious the very next second. Ever since coming to the Bear Country, he had been running into trouble non-stop. Even worse, not only was his partner no help at all, he had almost gotten him killed. Could it be that he was just incompatible with this place? A chill ran through his heart, and he got ready to pay the bill and leave. But when the boss's wife swiped the card, she suddenly seemed to think of something. She then walked over to the policeman and whispered a few words. Kwon Taek-ju's nerves instantly went taut. He saw the two policemen suddenly grab him and start hauling him outside, leaving Kwon Taek-ju completely baffled. What on earth is going on? But the police told him coldly that the card he had just used had already been reported. It was reported as stolen. Yet it had been perfectly fine back at the hotel just now, so how did it suddenly become a problem? But the police wouldn't listen to his explanation at all. They directly whipped out a pair of handcuffs and moved to cuff him. Kwon Taek-ju knew very clearly that he absolutely could not let himself be taken away, and he was just about to force his way out, when at that moment, Jenya walked into the restaurant. Kwon Taek-ju froze, then quickly realized. The owner of the card had arrived, so he could explain everything. So he obediently let the police hold him down for the moment, just waiting for Jenya to speak up and save him. But after waiting a long while, that guy just stood there watching the show. Even the cops got angry and yelled at him. "What are you standing there for? Get moving." Before the words had even fallen, a fist came smashing toward him. Yet in the very next second, Jenya grabbed the officer by the collar and lifted him up, his tone light. "Why don't we have a little talk first?" A moment later, Jenya walked out of the room with the officer. Kwon Taek-ju frowned. What exactly did he just do? Jenya shrugged and said blandly, "Just tipped him a bit for drinks." But the more Kwon Taek-ju thought about it, the more wrong it felt. This guy looks lazy, but his methods are very meticulous. I'm afraid that when he gave me that card, no, he had already planned to use that trick to track me. But he does things without caring about my situation at all. Once he goes crazy, he'd even dare kill me, his own partner. His temperament is really nasty. Just then, a shadow suddenly flashed past outside the window. Kwon Taek-ju's gaze turned cold as he fixed his eyes straight ahead. Jenya seemed to sense it too and was just about to turn his head to look, but someone grabbed his chin and forcibly held his movement in place. In the next second, Kwon Taek-ju lowered his voice and warned him, "Too careless, you're being tailed." Jenya hooked his lips into a smile. So what do we do? We've got to shake them off. The arms-dealing tycoon who held the lifeline of the nation had suddenly found himself an amusing toy. This was a sexy beauty who would explode at the slightest touch. So he put away his killing intent and accompanied the beauty in a little spy game. At this moment, Gwon Taek-ju pinched Jenya's chin and lowered his voice in warning. "You're being followed." Jenya curled his lips in a smile. "So what should we do? We have to shake them off." With that, he strolled lazily out of the room. Before long, Gwon Taek-ju was staring in shock at the man who came back. In less than 3 minutes, the person had been taken care of cleanly by him. He immediately pressed Jenya on what he had done, and the man laughed it off. "I just used a small trick or two." Gwon Taek-ju couldn't help grumbling inwardly. This guy is probably going to poke out someone's eyes again, or just cover their nose directly. Compared to that man who had been tailing him all the way before, it was actually this man who felt more like the rumored Bogdanov called the core. Jenya's knuckles tapped lightly on the tabletop, forcibly yanking his attention back. The man handed over an invitation, saying that the Bear Country and Japan were going to hold a contract signing celebration. Gwon Taek-ju immediately remembered he had impersonated Sakamoto Kohiro precisely in order to sneak into that banquet. But that sudden terrorist attack had smashed the plan to pieces. Jenya plucked away the invitation, his tone sinking as he dropped a bombshell. "This celebration is just a cover. The real banquet will be held the next day, hosted personally by the Bogdanov family. And the head of this family is the mastermind behind the energy company. His second son is a life-and-death friend of the president. Those who can be invited here are all tycoons who control the lifeblood of the nation. They might bring back crucial intelligence, so it was best for them to make the trip." Hearing this kind of insider news, however, Gwon Taek-ju remained unusually cold, only feeling that something was off. Bogdanov has already fallen into the sea. Why would his family still be in the mood to host a banquet? And on what basis are you so sure that guy is dead? I sent people to investigate long ago, and they didn't even find a corpse. At this, Gwon Taek-ju fell silent. To survive in such a harsh environment, that man truly wasn't ordinary. He quickly accepted Jenya's assessment. Right after that, the man produced another set of documents. He said this was the list of personnel involved in the development of anesthesia. But to keep their mouths shut, every one of these people had already been silenced. At those words, a chill shot through Gwon Taek-ju's heart. Then Jenya abruptly shifted the topic. However, among those who took part in the research, some people are still alive. Gwon Taek-ju immediately understood Bogdanov's entire family must have been involved in Phase 5 of the development, and the fact that they were still living so comfortably meant those researchers had been wiped out by them. The goal was to keep Phase 5 entirely in their own hands. Gwon Taek-ju was indeed persuaded, but he had no equipment. How was he supposed to go to the banquet to gather information? But this didn't stump Jenya. He directly took Gwon Taek-ju to a shabby underground storage room. Jenya picked up an old-fashioned telephone, his fingers flying over the dial. The next second, the thick wall actually began to slowly part. Gwon Taek-ju stared in shock at the scene before his eyes. Inside the secret chamber, all kinds of new model weapons were neatly arranged. He was that fearsome arms kingpin whose very name made people tremble. Even politicians had to bow their heads and hold their tongues when standing before him. Yet somehow he had tucked his temper away completely. He accompanied the little spy from the enemy side, seriously playing along with this spy game. The night outside was utterly silent, yet one place blazed with light, where social elites and politicians had all gathered. Private cars coming and going lined up in a long queue, each one waiting to be inspected. Gwon Taek-ju cooperatively handed over the invitation. The gate guard lowered his head and carefully scanned the hidden code. Then he leaned in to check the inside of the car, but suddenly his body went rigid. On the back seat sat a handsome man with blonde hair and blue eyes, who cast over a cold glance. Gwon Taek-ju failed to notice anything odd about the guard, and only muttered under his breath, "The inspection is way too strict, just like filming a spy drama. I even have to play along with this boring game." Jenya let out a derisive snort. "Can't be helped, because the one who was invited is me. If someone who wasn't invited wants to get in, they can only be the driver or pretend to be a lover, but you don't like the latter." While they were still bickering, the car had already pulled up at the entrance of the banquet. Gwon Taek-ju urged Jenya to get out of the car, but the man deliberately reminded him to act like a professional driver. Gwon Taek-ju forced down his anger, opened the car door for Jenya, and watched this kept man step out gracefully. If there weren't so many people around, Gwon Taek-ju would have really liked to land a couple of punches on him right then and there. Right after that, they walked into the banquet hall, so luxurious it almost made it hard to breathe. Gwon Taek-ju couldn't help but complain in a low voice. This kind of atmosphere was making him feel nauseous. Jenya didn't say anything, just gave a small smile. This little toy never failed to amuse him. Just then, a waiter stopped Kwon Taek-ju and signaled for him to wait in the driver's room. Kwon Taek-ju immediately looked to Jenya for help, but Jenya acted like he hadn't seen him and turned away. Kwon Taek-ju was furious. So much for being partners. At the critical moment, this guy was totally unreliable. But one thing was obvious. Jenya quickly blended into the circle of socialites and dignitaries. This man's identity was anything but simple. Time ticked by, and the banquet grew noisier and noisier. That was perfect. This was the best time to gather information. Taking advantage of the chaos, Kwon Taek-ju slipped out of the room. But as soon as he stepped out, a servant behind him chased after him, asking where he was going, and Kwon Taek-ju's heart suddenly sank. He immediately came up with an excuse, saying he was going to the restroom. The servant took him to a secluded bathroom, but it was absurdly far from the main hall. Kwon Taek-ju could only seize the moment and knock the servant out. Then he changed into the other man's work uniform and stepped out the door, carrying his vigilance with him. This handsome blonde, blue-eyed guy was really going too far. He actually even lured away his innocent wife. And now he'd run into the home of a top chaebol family, making trouble however he pleased. At this moment, Kwon Taek-ju was full of drive, disguising himself as a waiter and secretly probing for news of Anastasia. Lomonosov was precisely the president of the bear country, Borely Antonovich Lomonosov. Just as Kwon Taek-ju was intently watching his target, the Russian president brushed past him. A large hand reached out and directly lifted the red wine off the tray. Jenya silently came to stand beside him and, like a bystander, sighed softly. "Isn't this place very strange?" Obviously, it was so lively. Yet there was not a single person who could truly be called human. Without waiting for Kwon Taek-ju to answer, he cheerfully began introducing the key figures here. That shrewd brown-haired man is the second son of the Bogdanov family. All public affairs in the bear country have to pass his gate first before they're handed to the president. That old man sitting in the wheelchair is the true power holder of the energy company. After the Soviet Union collapsed, energy and arms became the two pillars propping up the national economy. And it was at that time that the Bogdanov family also rose to power, Jenya said at an unhurried pace. Hearing this, Kwon Taek-ju grew increasingly curious about this family. The man then reminded him to look up at the people upstairs. That was the actual eldest son of the Bogdanov family. He was about to inherit the family business and become the new power holder of the energy conglomerate. But before Jenya could finish speaking, Kwon Taek-ju suddenly asked, "What about Psyche Bogdanov? Was he an illegitimate child?" In Russia, that status was practically the same as being a bomb. That guy was like a gangster, completely mismatched with this honorable family. Hearing that, Jenya burst out laughing and said that Kwon Taek-ju had the wrong idea. That person was a law-abiding civil servant. But Kwon Taek-ju merely let out a cold laugh. How could someone who could whip out a rocket launcher possibly be a civil servant? Even a dog passing by would roll on the ground laughing at that. Jenya didn't hear Kwon Taek-ju's muttered comment. He went on with his introduction. That man was very famous in the field of military supplies. There was no one in the Black Beast Party who didn't know him, Psyche Bogdanov. He was the bridge between the Black Beast Party and the chaebols. With power on both sides in his hands, it was no surprise people called him the core. As Kwon Taek-ju was still thinking this over, Jenya suddenly lowered his voice and reminded him. Just now, Psyche Bogdanov had quietly gone upstairs with two ministers. Kwon Taek-ju immediately became alert. He casually said he was going to take out the trash, then turned around and walked out of the house. Once he reached the backyard, he found that only the room on the third floor still had its lights on. He grabbed the trash can and knocked the guard out with one blow. Immediately after, he released his concealed gear, ready to climb up to the third floor and investigate in person. A mad, beautiful lunatic who had been empty for 20 years had finally found a new toy. That was an over-energetic little spy. But the little spy could never have imagined it. The several times he came back from the brink of death, it was all because someone had been playing with him like a toy. At this moment, he was hanging on a wall 10 meters high. The objective was very clear. Climb up to the third floor and find out the information. Just as he reached out to grab the railing, the climbing rope suddenly snapped. The feeling of weightlessness swallowed his whole body in an instant, and Kwon Taek-ju abruptly hooked onto the edge of the balcony, his fingers trembling, a chill running down his back. Afterwards, he still climbed up to the third floor. If clearly no one was inside the room, why were the lights still on? Yet when he pushed the door open and looked, there really was no one inside, so who was this light turned on for? He was frowning when Jenya's voice suddenly came through his earpiece. The other person let him finish playing around before pricking up his ears and listening carefully to what followed. Two unfamiliar people's conversation came through the earpiece. They were discussing how to deal with the research error of codename 29. Kwon Taek-ju's heart gave a jolt. He immediately set aside all stray thoughts and listened intently to the information that followed. One of them said that North Korea was very troubled by this mistake and that the cause was still under investigation. But the other said that they had already quietly disposed of the Eagle agent. Kwon Taek-ju furrowed his brows tightly, his suspicions almost bursting out of his mouth. The fifth phase project secretly advanced by the Bear Country and North Korea's involvement, plus the Eagle's surveillance. There were also Eagle Sauce agents who got wiped out. All the clues matched up. This was Anastasia's intelligence. Suddenly the sound of a door closing came through the earpiece, and Kwon Taek-ju guessed someone had come in again. But Genya said it was Bogdanov going out to take a call. And only then did Kwon Taek-ju finally breathe a sigh of relief. Right after that, he couldn't help his curiosity. How exactly had Genya planted the bug? He heard the man suddenly sound a bit aggrieved, complaining in a low voice. Just now a lady invited me upstairs to have some fun, and I couldn't turn her down, so I casually slipped the wiretap into their room. After hearing the man's explanation, Kwon Taek-ju only grew more suspicious. What exactly was Genya's identity? That he could be invited to this kind of banquet and even stroll freely into the depths of a private residence. He immediately pressed the man on where he was now, and Genya said he was in the basement. Kwon Taek-ju was even more puzzled. What was he doing in the basement? That lazy, delighted laugh came through the earpiece again. Scared you? I'm watching you on the third floor. Kwon Taek-ju's heart jolted, and when he looked up he saw the surveillance camera at an angle above him. So he was so angry he lost control and raised his middle finger straight at the camera. The next second, Genya's unrestrained laughter echoed from the basement. A munitions tycoon capable of shaking a nation's economy was actually spending his time playing spy games with his wife. And this little spy still didn't know that he had long since become the madman's toy, and was even feeding the other side new ideas on how to play with him. At this moment, he spoke into the communicator. He wanted to eavesdrop on Bogdanov. Genya burst out laughing as soon as he heard that, and immediately tossed out a workable plan. He said that when he was touring the residence, he saw a telephone at the end of the second-floor hallway, and there was also a telephone in Bogdanov's office. Although the two phones were on different lines, he could provide technical support. As long as Kwon Taek-ju could reach the second floor within 8 seconds, they could achieve two-way monitoring. Hearing this, Kwon Taek-ju decided. This time he had to seize the opportunity. So he didn't take the usual route and instead jumped straight down from the third floor. Then he timed it just right to hook onto the second floor steps. As he was trembling and hauling himself up onto the balcony, Genya's praise came through his earpiece. Looks like you're pretty impressive. Kwon Taek-ju had no time to reply, but he couldn't help complaining in his heart. He was about to drop dead from exhaustion, and that guy was just watching the show from behind a screen. Next, he held his breath and carefully walked to the end of the corridor. It was just then that Genya gave the signal, wait for him to count to 3. Kwon Taek-ju immediately grabbed the phone, and Bogdanov's voice came through the receiver. The North Korean technicians would arrive in Moscow in 2 days, and they would be disguised as tourists. These words were spoken very vaguely, but that instead made it feel more like the key point was being hidden, making it even more certain that it was related to Anastasia. Just as Kwon Taek-ju was still pondering this, a burst of deafening, high-decibel roaring suddenly exploded in his earpiece, startling Kwon Taek-ju so much that his hand jerked and he flung the phone away. The piercing noise shook him until he was dizzy and seeing stars. Yet the earpiece had been perfectly fine. How could it suddenly break? Urgent footsteps, however, were now coming from the hallway. On the other side, the sound of a door opening rang out again, and someone asked coldly of his subordinates, "Have you found the man?" Kwon Taek-ju's heart sank and his whole body went rigid in an instant. That was Bogdanov's voice. He immediately slipped into the room next to him and, judging by the footsteps, concluded. There were 3 people outside in total. He lunged from behind, taking down one bodyguard first. Seizing the instant when the other bodyguard had just crouched down, he finished him cleanly with a single stroke. Kwon Taek-ju then immediately charged into the conference room next door. He braced the door hard with the table and his mind raced for a way to break out. But bullets simply punched through the door panel and swept inside. The wooden table was getting riddled like a sieve and looked about to collapse. With no other choice, Kwon Taek-ju could only brace himself to face them head-on. But just then, he suddenly smelled that familiar woody scent, laced with a faint hint of brandy. The next second, a pair of large hands suddenly shot out from behind him. Right after that, they clamped down directly over his mouth. When the bodyguards burst in, they didn't find anything at all. They only saw Genya clamping one hand tightly over Kwon Taek-ju's nose and mouth. Those sharp eyes were fixed intently on the commotion outside, cold as a knife. This is the second time he has personally seen this lunatic kill someone with his bare hands. His long, slender fingers directly pried open the enemy's mouth. A tearing sound immediately came from beside his ears, along with a wail that could not be suppressed. All the hairs on Kwon Taek-ju's body stood on end. He no longer dared to look at that bloody scene. Just now, when Kwon Taek-ju was fleeing for his life, it was Jenya who forcefully yanked him into the dark room. After the bodyguards who were chasing them returned empty-handed, Kwon Taek-ju followed Jenya into the damp secret passage, his mind full of questions. How could this guy know about such a private place? Jenya suddenly raised his hand and opened the lid at the top. The person outside was standing sideways, facing them. Jenya remained silent, his gaze falling on Kwon Taek-ju. The man shook his head lightly, and the meaning was very clear. They still couldn't go out yet. But just as the person outside had only just turned around, Kwon Taek-ju immediately gave a thumbs up. Right now, go. In the next second, the two of them burst out of the passage, and the bodyguard was so startled he lost control and fired wildly. Jenya reacted extremely fast, dodging right along the bullet's trajectory. Right after, the corners of his lips lifted, forming a cold and mocking smile. With a crushing sense of pressure, he approached the gun-firing bodyguard step by step. The bodyguard fell straight to the ground, screaming in terror, "Don't come any closer!" But Jenya's long, slender fingers still forced the other man's mouth open. In the next second, a scream exploded through the castle. A chill ran down Kwon Taek-ju's back. He didn't dare look at all. This simply wasn't something a human would do. The commotion instantly alarmed more people. They saw Jenya grab Kwon Taek-ju by the throat with one hand. With his other hand, he suddenly shoved the window open. Before Kwon Taek-ju could react to what he was doing, Jenya yanked him and jumped straight down from the second floor. The two of them crashed heavily onto the sedan that was about to leave, and Kwon Taek-ju choked and coughed violently. Cough, cough! The man's eyes were as cold as ice. He raised his arm, moving terrifyingly fast. The next second, he punched straight through the car window and forcibly dragged the driver out. Then he slid into the driver's seat and floored the accelerator. Meanwhile, Kwon Taek-ju, hanging off the roof, was almost driven mad with panic. He even suspected this guy had forgotten about him. But right after that, Jenya yanked the car door open and hurled himself into the speeding vehicle. Kwon Taek-ju reacted quickly and directly dragged the official in the car over to use as a human shield. Sure enough, the gunfire outside stopped at once. This person's status was obviously very high. But in the next second, bullets punched straight through the rear of the car. The one firing was actually the second son of the Bogyudnofyu family. This lunatic didn't care about the hostage at all, so Jenya had no choice but to push the speed even higher. The sedan arrogantly smashed through the main gate and roared off into the distance. All the way, the hostage was so terrified he lost control and kept screaming hoarsely. This made Kwon Taek-ju so annoyed he felt stifled, and he almost wanted to just knock the man out cold. He was thinking that when a gunshot suddenly exploded by his ear. From up ahead came a man's cold voice. Too noisy. Before long, the two of them had broken into a private home and slipped into an empty house to catch their breath for a moment. The little spy finally mustered up his courage and started questioning who exactly this top really was. But the other man diverted the topic in just a few sentences, and Kwon Taek-ju could only keep running away with Jenya. And now they were trespassing in yet another private home. In the bathroom, Jenya was rinsing the blood off his body. In the mist, the man curled his lips into an eerie smile, and the faint outline of an eagle emblem appeared on his chest. In the living room, Kwon Taek-ju was using ice water to cool and numb the pain in his arm. It had been wrenched and strained just now when Jenya grabbed hold of him. Thinking of this made Kwon Taek-ju even angrier. This guy had gone straight to using the bathroom without a word, and the moment the owner came back they would definitely notice. He was holding his breath in frustration when Jenya walked out of the bathroom. Kwon Taek-ju couldn't help complaining inwardly. Why is this guy dressed so tightly wrapped up? They're both men. Just covering up casually would be enough. Jenya raised his hand and picked up a wine bottle, corking a brow as he asked, "What are you staring at me for? Your eyes are really misbehaving." Kwon Taek-ju didn't banter with him and went straight to the point, asking what his real identity was. "You don't look like an agent no matter how I see it. You had an invitation to the banquet and you blended in way too well at the party. Not only that, you also knew about the secret passage in the Bogdanopsia residence. And you never talk about your plans, you just show up out of nowhere. You obviously have other intentions." Kwon Taek-ju threw out all his suspicions in one breath. In the shadows, Jenya's expression slowly darkened. Then he suddenly seized the initiative and began to probe. "Looks like your superior didn't tell you everything." Kwon Taek-ju only shrugged, the meaning very clear. His superior had said nothing at all. Then he tapped his knuckles on the table, his tone urging, "Hurry up, introduce yourself properly." Jenya couldn't help complaining. "You've been this cold to me all along. Just because of that?" Gwon Taek-ju didn't beat around the bush and admitted directly, "You're part of the privileged class in the Bear Country. It's easy for you to get anything you want, so why are you helping us?" In the dim room, for the first time Jenya forced his mind to its limit, to wrap an old lie inside a new one. He then gave a perfect explanation. "Because I am a businessman." Gwon Taek-ju frowned. "You want to sell out your country?" Jenya, however, sat down unhurriedly and said calmly that he had no interest in the Bear Country's Phase 5 research. He only wanted to obtain the design blueprints, build a new Phase 5, and sell it to a special client. Gwon Taek-ju suddenly understood. If Anastasia were to be remodeled and brought into being, then the buyer would definitely also be someone with power and influence. So this was the reason Jenya was cooperating. Yet for some reason, Gwon Taek-ju still felt that something was off. Gwon Taek-ju stared at the blonde man, with one thought stuck in his mind. Should he believe him or not? The arms dealer who had always done as he pleased never cared how others saw him. Yet just a casual word of praise from his wife could instantly get him high. He even felt that whatever his wife said was always right. At this moment, Jenya was still complaining that Gwon Taek-ju was too indifferent. "If your first impression of someone is bad, will you keep hating me forever?" But the utterly straight-laced Gwon Taek-ju didn't take in a word of that. He just muttered under his breath. He was calculating something else. Jenya thought his complaint had worked and immediately pressed on. "Are you thinking about not hating me so much anymore?" But the next second, a black object suddenly flew toward him. Jenya was startled, yet still caught it steadily. Gwon Taek-ju then explained, "Inside are recordings of calls between Bogdanov and someone from the Sanchez group, and they can simulate Bogdanov's voice to bait out the people who spoke with him. As long as they see that guy, they'll know who the incoming North Korean technical expert is, and they'll also be able to confirm his destination." After listening, Jenya fell uncharacteristically silent, but his next words came with a note of mockery. "Do you know what the Black Beast Party's tattoo stands for?" Gwon Taek-ju froze, not understanding why he suddenly brought this up. The man lowered his voice to explain. "People with the same tattoo all belong to the same syndicate. If you hurt Sanchez's people, it's the same as declaring war on all of them. Are you really fine with that?" Hearing this, Gwon Taek-ju remained very calm. "It's fine." Jenya completely disagreed and questioned coldly, "What makes you so confident?" Gwon Taek-ju simply said, as if it were only natural, "Because I know a very useful monster." Jenya was stunned. It was the first time he'd heard anyone praise him like that. The tightness in his chest suddenly eased, and his mood instantly brightened. He immediately changed his mind as well. "You're right. We'll go with this plan." Night fell soon enough. The two of them arrived at an abandoned building, and Gwon Taek-ju gripped his handgun, warily sweeping his gaze around. Jenya finished half a cigarette, then let his fingers relax, flicking the butt casually to the ground. The next second, Gwon Taek-ju launched the attack, the gunshots tearing through the silence of the night. The guard fumbled to draw his handgun, only to discover a tall figure standing right in front of the car. A large hand suddenly crashed through the glass and yanked him out. The next second, a blood-curdling scream exploded in the air. Gwon Taek-ju immediately turned his face away. He didn't want to look at something that gory. Once the guard was dealt with, the two of them, radiating a crushing sense of pressure, forced their way straight into the building. As soon as the door was pulled open, they saw a group of people inside, all neatly dressed, but with very unfriendly expressions. Sitting right in the middle was Sanchez's keyman, Borisu. He curled his lips into a smile. "You're a little late." These two men who dared to charge into the enemy's den. One is a workaholic who shows no mercy for the sake of the mission, and the other is an arms tycoon accompanying his wife on a trip. But the enemies had long been waiting here, even sighing on purpose and saying they were late. Right after that, he brought up the commotion at the Bogdanov residence last night. Borisu said that when he heard the troublemaker was Jenya, he simply couldn't believe it. But Jenya didn't respond, only shrugged indifferently. Gwon Taek-ju, however, couldn't help wondering, are these two very close? Unwilling to give up, Borisu pressed again. "Why did you have to make such a scene?" Jenya just replied with a grin. "Because it was fun." Borisu rubbed his forehead, his face full of helplessness. This lunatic was just messing around. Gwon Taek-ju finally couldn't stand their pointless chatter and asked directly, "Where is Anastasia?" Borisu waved his hand casually and said he didn't know what that thing was. But before he could finish, Gwon Taek-ju forced in on him. "Then should I be asking you about Project 29? Borisu froze at once, his expression darkening as he sneered and mocked them for being too naive. Did they really think he would answer obediently? After hearing this, Gwon Taek-ju stopped beating around the bush. Since reasoning won't work, they can only use force. As he spoke, he tossed out a smoke grenade. What? White smoke instantly billowed through the room. The view went completely blank, and nothing could be seen. Gwon Taek-ju immediately put on his special glasses and locked onto the enemy's position. He moved extremely fast and took out the nearest bodyguards first, but the next second he realized Borisu was gone. Right after that, someone lunged at him from the side. His arm was slashed open by a blade, leaving a bloody gash. Gwon Taek-ju raised his short gun, aiming straight at the shadow in front of him. But when he saw clearly, he froze. It was Jenya, and around Jenya, bodyguards were already lying all over the floor, while another wave of enemies charged forward. Gwon Taek-ju nimbly dodged and fired an extra shot downward at the same time. Borisu clutched his leg and screamed on the spot, crying like his breath had been cut off. It was finally over. Gwon Taek-ju took off his coat, getting ready to treat his wound. But then he heard Jenya come out with a ridiculously phrased concern. It was too dangerous. If your stomach got stabbed through, you wouldn't be able to make the bed for at least a month. The angle of that comfort was way too strange, and Gwon Taek-ju simply assumed Jenya was pitying him. Yet the next second, Jenya suddenly grabbed his arm. 2 fingers pressed around his wrist, and in a low voice she sighed that he was too thin. Those words landed like barbs in Gwon Taek-ju's ears. He turned slightly to the side and said coolly, "I don't need your help." With that, he directly tore open his shirt and did a simple bandage job on his arm. Not long after, the injured Borisu was tied to a chair. Gwon Taek-ju walked over with his hands in his pockets, ready to start the interrogation. Jenya beside him looked utterly excited, eyes shining like she was about to jump into the fight. What kind of vicious demon partner was this? One was gripping a short knife like he could skin someone alive at any moment. The other not only didn't stop him, but was full of eager anticipation, clearly wanting to try it herself. Just these two alone had already thrown the enemy camp into chaos. The enemy boss, Borisu, was quickly captured. Gwon Taek-ju rummaged through him directly and pulled out a few weapon components. Borisu sneered, saying it was useless for him to do that. Before he even finished speaking, Gwon Taek-ju shoved the parts straight into his mouth, and Borisu writhed in agony. Jenya at the side stared fixedly, eyes glowing, in an impossibly good mood. Gwon Taek-ju paced back and forth as he asked the North Korean technician, "You're here to solve Project 29's R&D problem, right? Then where is 29? Take me to him." As soon as the words fell, he casually slammed a punch into Borisu. But the man only shook his head, saying he didn't know. Gwon Taek-ju's gaze darkened, and the interrogation immediately escalated. His vicious fists came down again and again, utterly merciless. Borisu was in complete disarray, yet still stubbornly refused to cooperate. Gwon Taek-ju could see it. This guy wasn't going to take the bait, so he could only get brutal. He picked up the short knife from the ground and offhandedly told Jenya to wait outside. But Jenya only shrugged and let Gwon Taek-ju do as he pleased, acting as if he didn't exist. Gwon Taek-ju had originally meant well and was looking after him, but Jenya instead looked downright excited. Gwon Taek-ju stopped wasting time and pressed the short knife directly against Borisu's forehead. His tone was icy and malicious, using an Indian method to peel off your entire skin. Usually, before the flaying is finished, you'll die from the pain and go into shock. The cold metal touched his skin, and Borisu trembled all over in terror. At the same moment, Jenya's eyes went wide, so excited that even his breathing quickened. The next second, a shrill, tragic scream rang out from inside the house. The matter ended quickly, and the two walked out the front door. Jenya, however, suddenly acted completely out of character and wouldn't stop talking. He eagerly leaned in to ask Gwon Taek-ju, "Did you really want to flay someone?" Gwon Taek-ju didn't answer. He only wiped his hands with a look of disgust and said coldly that blood was too sticky. Jenya didn't mind his coldness at all and took the chance to praise how charming Gwon Taek-ju had just been, saying even his own thermos had been heated up by it. That line instantly set Gwon Taek-ju off. He suddenly grabbed Jenya by the collar and reminded him coldly, "Next time you have this kind of problem, say so earlier. I'll be more than happy to peel off one more piece of skin." Jenya's eyes went wide as he stared straight at that face so tight with anger. He immediately grabbed the other's wrist and slowly pressed that hand down. At that moment, it was as if something quietly took root in his heart. The hot-blooded young little spy was almost driven mad with anger, all because the midnight electronic music next to him was so loud that he simply couldn't sleep. The little spy endured it to his limit and suddenly sat up, only to see this lunatic grinning triumphantly. They had just stirred up a scene in the enemy camp. Afterwards they learned North Korean technician Hong Yo-UK would disguise himself as a tourist and board that train crossing Siberia. And before they reached Moscow, Bogdanov would make contact with Hong Yo-UK. This was almost the same as touching a nuke. So Gwon Taek-ju and his team immediately boarded the same train. But the moment Jenya got on the train, he started playing cards. This let Gwon Taek-ju experience for the first time what insomnia really felt like. But he refused to let himself lose sleep because of this guy, thinking that Gwon Taek-ju forced down his temper and started counting sheep. Yet the noise beside him just kept getting louder. Gwon Taek-ju finally couldn't take it anymore and suddenly sat up, only to meet the man's smug, grinning face again. Gwon Taek-ju simply stopped avoiding it and looked straight at him, openly and boldly. And Jenya, this guy, wasn't the least bit stage frightened. Under his gaze he could still stay that calm. Just as it was about to end, Gwon Taek-ju suddenly caught a whiff of that familiar metallic tang of blood. In that instant it was like being struck by lightning. He was so repulsed he wanted to walk straight out. So when Jenya finished washing and came out, he saw the window wide open and looked puzzled. Why had Gwon Taek-ju frozen himself to the point of shivering? But the little spy glared back at him fiercely. He didn't say anything, but the meaning was clear. It's all your fault. Jenya understood instantly, and smoothly teased that Gwon Taek-ju could actually watch without changing his expression, when an ordinary person would have run out long ago. Gwon Taek-ju replied coldly that he could watch a high-quality movie here for free, so why should he leave? Hearing this, Jenya felt a bit proud on the spot. That's right, my quality really is very high. As he spoke, he also gave a thunder-like shrug and, in passing, praised Gwon Taek-ju for how nicely that line had just been said. Gwon Taek-ju forced down his anger, veins throbbing, and couldn't help complaining about what kind of brain circuit this man had, actually taking sarcasm as praise. But this was not the time to argue, because they still had to find the North Korean technicians on the train, and once the other party became aware of their presence, Bogdanov would very likely cancel the meeting on the spot. Their plan would immediately be scrapped, and all their efforts would have been for nothing. At such a critical moment, though, Jenya was only focused on playing cards, so Gwon Taek-ju lowered his voice and asked him, "How did you deal with Borisu? If that man goes to tip them off, we'll be in trouble." But Jenya just grinned and told him not to worry. Borisu had been locked up by him, and without his permission, there was simply no way for him to get out. Gwon Taek-ju was still worried, yet inexplicably felt that, when it came to getting things done, Jenya was actually pretty reliable. The unruly little spy, without even realizing it, had completely piqued the arms tycoon's interest and desire to probe deeper. Not long ago, the two of them had just finished talking through the anesthesia assignment, when Gwon Taek-ju casually glanced at the time. The next second, he jolted, as if something had suddenly occurred to him. He immediately lowered his head and started rummaging around, leaving Jenya across from him stunned. Gwon Taek-ju pulled out his laptop, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Right after that, his tone suddenly softened. He dialed a number and began saying something quietly in Korean. The sight instantly hooked Jenya's curiosity. This was the first time he'd ever seen Gwon Taek-ju so obedient. Stuffed full of question marks, the man secretly picked up his phone to use a voice translator. The screen kept flashing "Mom," and the voice didn't sound like a young woman at all. It really was his mother. Before long, Gwon Taek-ju hung up, letting out a long breath. But then he heard Jenya lazily tease, "I was always curious what a mama's boy looks like. Turns out it's you." At that, Gwon Taek-ju shot him a vicious glare and coolly mocked him for just pretending to understand. Jenya only acted even more nonchalant. "What? Did I hit a nerve? Is that why you're so riled up?" Gwon Taek-ju could only sigh. "If I were really a mama's boy, I wouldn't have to work this hard." As soon as he finished speaking, Jenya immediately pressed on. "Then keep talking." While packing his luggage, Gwon Taek-ju sarcastically said that Jenya didn't understand anything at all. How hard it really is for a person to stay alive. When you lose your other family members, the one who remains will heap double the worry and expectations entirely onto you. And in order not to make his mother worry, Gwon Taek-ju hid the truth about his job. His mother had always thought he was just a civil servant in some small place. At this point, Gwon Taek-ju suddenly stopped talking. Jenya was listening with great interest and couldn't help but frown. "Why aren't you going on?" Gwon Taek-ju said there was no need to talk about that. The next second, he coldly mocked Jenya. "Are you so bored that you want to hear about other people's old stories?" He casually pulled out a book and shoved it into the man's hands, telling him to use it to kill time. But Jenya's face darkened, and he directly said he had no interest in this kind of one-sided preaching book. After saying that, he walked out of the room. Gwon Taek-ju took it all in. This person was clearly his partner, yet he acted so mysteriously, never saying what he was going to do when he went out. Not long after, the two of them were acting as if nothing had happened again. Just as the atmosphere had begun to ease, Jenya started getting restless again. Their legs were pressed tightly together. Gwon Taek-ju finally couldn't hold back and said coldly for the man to move his leg away. But Jenya played dumb, saying his legs were too long, that he really couldn't help it. After he said this, he even deliberately stayed like that, waiting for his partner's reaction. But Gwon Taek-ju only let out a bored yawn. Jenya immediately complained that he wasn't cute at all. Gwon Taek-ju turned his face to the side, raised a hand to scratch his ear, and directly pretended he hadn't heard. Like a wild yet beautiful little spy, clearly the kind everyone wants to snatch away. Not only had he caught the eye of that arms tycoon driven mad and out of control, even the train attendant took the chance to take advantage of him. When the train arrived at Sukbader station, the attendant came over and requested to carry out immigration inspection. Gwon Taek-ju obediently handed over his passport, but he immediately noticed the attendant behind him had been staring at him the whole time. The man's heart tightened and he felt a bit guilty. He had long since discarded the identity of Sakamoto Kohiro and even changed to a new name on his passport. So in theory, there shouldn't be any problem. While he was still calculating quickly, the attendant had already finished the check and turned to leave. Gwon Taek-ju had just let out a sigh of relief when the door was pulled open again. It was still the one who had been staring at him, and the other man, with a cold face, said he wanted to conduct a full-body search. Jenya, on the other hand, cooperated to an excessive degree and finished his inspection just like that. The attendant immediately motioned for Gwon Taek-ju to stand up. He had no choice but to imitate Jenya's posture and stand firm with his legs apart. But in the next second, the attendant suddenly squatted down, his hand sliding along Gwon Taek-ju's ankle, then his calf and further up his thigh. The man's gaze gradually sank, growing darker. Gwon Taek-ju's whole body jolted, and he started cursing inwardly. He was so perfunctory when checking the others. So why is he being so thorough with me? The moment the flight attendant's hand touched his waist, Jenya finally couldn't hold it in and let out a sharp snort of laughter. Gwon Taek-ju couldn't endure it anymore either. He grabbed the man by the neck, his fist about to slam down. The flight attendant turned deathly pale with fright and was trembling all over. Gwon Taek-ju himself was shaking too, but he forced himself to hold back his fist. He couldn't cause trouble here. Right after that, he shoved the man away hard. The other man was scared out of his wits and turned to flee the room. Jenya, however, mocked him with obvious malice. He seems to really like you. No sooner had he said it than a book came flying at him. Still not satisfied with stirring things up, he added, "That guy's got a nice body. Why don't you take the chance and have a go?" Gwon Taek-ju was utterly annoyed and shot back with a cold sneer. "That doesn't sound like something someone as good-looking as you would say." Jenya instantly grinned even wider. "So, you like my type?" Hearing that, Gwon Taek-ju rolled his eyes and snapped back. "Don't say something that terrifying." Just then, Jenya's phone suddenly rang. The man's expression turned serious in an instant, and he turned and walked out of the room. The more Gwon Taek-ju thought about it, the stranger it seemed. This guy always had to avoid him whenever he took a call. Did he really need to be that cautious? With that thought, he slowed his breathing and carefully followed after him. He saw Jenya's face full of coldness, as if radiating killing intent, saying something he couldn't make out. In this state, he looked like a completely different person from his usual sloppy self. In the next second, however, Jenya slanted his eyes and looked over in his direction. Gwon Taek-ju was so scared that he jolted. He saw the man curl his lips into a smile. Ever since he saw the little spy being taken advantage of, and still daring to secretly monitor him afterward, the arms tycoon had started acting strange. It was as if spring had suddenly arrived, and his desire was inexplicably ignited. And after Gwon Taek-ju was caught red-handed peeping at Jenya making a phone call, he behaved himself for a while. After that, Jenya installed surveillance in the North Korean technician's room, but the other party hardly ever went out. This made Gwon Taek-ju's mission suddenly become easier. But even so, he was almost tortured to the point of collapse. All because another primetime drama was playing out before his eyes. And the female lead was that train attendant who often passed by the North Korean technician's door. Gwon Taek-ju held a book but could not read a single word, and muttered in a low voice, "Last night it was the soft sleeper attendant. Today it's the hard sleeper attendant. Looks like Jenya wants to sample the whole carriage." With a violent jolt, the bottle of liquor on the table was knocked over. The alcohol splashed out and directly stained Gwon Taek-ju's pants. He held back to his limit, then looked up and glared fiercely at the culprit. Jenya, however, seemed to have calculated it in advance, curling his lips into a wicked smile. In the next second, he even went further, sticking out his tongue to lick the corner of his mouth, his teasing utterly unrestrained. Gwon Taek-ju cursed in annoyance, but no one paid him any attention. He really had no choice and could only consider leaving this cramped space. Jenya, however, deliberately moved closer to him. Kwon Taek-ju panicked on the spot and practically fled out of the room. After that, he took care of a personal issue in the bathroom. And just as he finished washing and came out, he saw Jenya waiting at the door. Kwon Taek-ju tensed up instantly. Why is this guy here? Then the sounds he just made. Did he hear all of that? As he was thinking this, he saw Jenya suddenly step in close, brace one hand against the door, and completely block his way. The next second, he casually tossed out a perfunctory sorry. Kwon Taek-ju immediately shot back sarcastically. Shouldn't he be the one apologizing, since he's watched plenty of heavily explicit movies himself? After that, the two of them returned to the room, and Jenya's gaze stayed glued to Kwon Taek-ju the entire time. Kwon Taek-ju finished putting on his clothes and frowned as he looked back at him. Then he heard Jenya throw out a ridiculous, baffling question. What does it feel like to play cards with a man? Kwon Taek-ju was speechless on the spot and only said he couldn't imagine it. But Jenya sounded like he was seriously analyzing it. Right, playing cards with a black man would feel disgusting, wouldn't it? Hearing that, Kwon Taek-ju couldn't help complaining. Shouldn't you first wonder whether you'd react or not? You're an arms tycoon who does everything on a whim, yet you're fixated on another man's sexual orientation. At this moment, he was still probing his partner, asking, why didn't you react to the women before? Do you not like women? Kwon Taek-ju let out a low chuckle and said the other had gotten it wrong, that he only liked women. Even if there were only men left in the world, he still wouldn't play cards with a man. Hearing this, Jenya gave a very meaningful smile. He then immediately asked Kwon Taek-ju what type of women he liked. Kwon Taek-ju was even more puzzled. Why are you asking this? Are you trying to set me up with someone? Jenya shrugged and said he needed to get a sense of things first. What if one day he ended up stealing a woman Kwon Taek-ju liked? That would be a problem. Kwon Taek-ju scoffed and shot back directly. A beast like you would actually find that troublesome? Jenya suddenly raised his hand and lightly touched his, pressing his tone as he urged him, hurry up and answer. Kwon Taek-ju was very irritated. This guy would latch onto a tiny matter and just refuse to let it go. Then he said he liked women with big breasts, and Jenya immediately laughed and teased him. Your tastes are really quite specific. He went on to say that he didn't like clinging types. If he played cards with the same person twice, he would feel fed up. Hearing this, Kwon Taek-ju found him even more distasteful, since he had personally watched this man change women faster than flipping pages. Then he couldn't help his curiosity. Did Jenya really not have a regular partner? Jenya replied flatly, no. But in the next second, Jenya suddenly looked at Kwon Taek-ju and gave him a smile full of hidden meaning. But if it's someone with an overwhelming aura, who has rebellion in his heart and refuses to yield no matter how you torment him, then that's hard to say, since I like conquest. Kwon Taek-ju, however, didn't catch the man's implication at all. He only complained in disgust. Your personality is awful. No wonder you're single. The two of them just kept drinking and chatting idly like that. As the drinks kicked in, they even started singing and dancing, letting go completely. Kwon Taek-ju's face was burning red as he muttered under his breath. If the department head saw me like this, he'd definitely be furious enough to jump up and down. Yet at the very moment he finished pouring the drink, he suddenly realized Jenya had already fallen asleep. He casually mocked him. So your alcohol tolerance isn't that great after all. As soon as he said that, he himself slumped forward onto the table and started snoring away. But just then, Jenya slowly opened his eyes. The man raised his hand to snuff out his cigar, moving unhurriedly, then leisurely took another drag. Yet his gaze fell on the brown cigar in his hand and paused for a moment. Jenya held the cigar lightly between his fingertips, as if weighing something. Then he grabbed Kwon Taek-ju's finger, as though he intended to cut it off cleanly. A moment later, he smiled again, that smile light and dangerous. Fast asleep, Kwon Taek-ju had no idea that he had once again narrowly escaped disaster at the hands of this lunatic. All to see this defiant, unruly man lose control in total abandon. The arms dealer had racked his brains, deliberately finding a voluptuous woman the other party likes, just to make the man lose control. But at this moment, Kwon Taek-ju wasn't thinking that much. In his half-asleep state, he realized Jenya was gone. It was like he had gone to take a shower. So he lazily lay back down, waiting for the man to come out. But once the alcohol hit him, he sank back into his dreams. Right after that, the sound of a door opening came from inside the room. The next second, Jenya grabbed his hand and shoved it straight into a cigar cutter. With a crisp click, Kwon Taek-ju jolted awake from a nightmare. A chill ran down his back as he stared at his own fingers. What he had just felt really didn't seem like a dream. He then heard the sound of running water in the bathroom. This scene was almost exactly the same as in his dream. Kwon Taek-ju began to panic. Gripping the pistol tightly, he quietly crept toward the bathroom. But in the next second, Jenya walked in from outside instead, looking confused as he asked what he was doing. Kwon Taek-ju stared at the man's raised eyebrows and appraising expression. Kwon Taek-ju was even more stunned. Jenya was clearly outside. So who was the person in the bathroom? Thinking of this, he immediately tensed up, his gaze locked firmly on the bathroom. Yet Jenya swaggered over and slapped a bag of cookies straight into his arms. Then he pulled open the bathroom door, and out walked a shapely blonde beauty. The woman first thanked Jenya for letting her use the bathroom to shower, and the next second she yanked him back into the bathroom. Seeing this, Kwon Taek-ju was completely dumbfounded. After a few seconds he finally realized, this time Jenya had actually set his sights on a tourist, even using the bathroom as bait to lure the beauty in. He held that pack of cookies, even more puzzled. Where did he buy these from this time? Then he was impolite as well, tore it open and started eating. By the look of it, these were also meant to coax the beauty. But as he ate, Kwon Taek-ju suddenly furrowed his brows. Annoyed, he grabbed a pillow to press down over his lower body, forcibly pushing down the erection of little Zejo. It was only later that he found out this woman's name was Ru Iju, a Frenchwoman who was about to get married. Logically speaking, Jenya would never play cards with the same person twice. But Ruiju kept staying around here. What was even more outrageous was that Jenya never turned down Ruiju's invitations. You could tell he really had a thing for her type. Soon it was afternoon, and this beauty suddenly came over to strike up a conversation with Kwon Taek-ju, asking what book he had been reading all this time. The man merely replied flatly, a detective novel. And the woman smiled and asked how he could be into that kind of thing. After speaking, she kept a faint smile on her lips, her gaze glued to the man's face without moving away. But the extremely straight Kwon Taek-ju thought the beauty also wanted to borrow the book, which directly made Ruiju laugh. The next second, she leaned in toward him and murmured seductively, "Women usually prefer colder men. Do you know why?" Before she could finish, Jenya walked in. Right after that, the two of them sat down and started playing cards. Kwon Taek-ju slowly let out a breath. He had known it would turn out like this. The wild, dark-skinned hottie was like a piece of chocolate cake. He hooked out every bit of desire in the arms tycoon, who practically wanted to go up and take a bite. He lowered his head to look at his hand that had been painfully squeezed, feeling stifled. Why would he be interested in a man? The blonde beauty pulled out all her tricks, desperately trying to pull Kwon Taek-ju's gaze away. But that was Pen when Jenya walked over. Then he simply went on playing cards with the beauty as if no one else existed. Kwon Taek-ju let out a light snort. He'd long since gotten used to scenes like this. He watched the man's face as he read with utter seriousness. Jenya, however, got a wicked idea and deliberately invited him to join the card game. Kwon Taek-ju blew up on the spot and snapped, "Why are you dragging an innocent person into this too?" Jenya, smiling, provoked him. "Why have you been holding back this whole time? Or is it that you can't?" Kwon Taek-ju glared angrily at the man, forcing himself to hold his tongue. He'd swallowed it down those few times already. If he let it slide again, this would never end. He simply stood up, his tone hard. "I was the one who came first." The scene before him was both sexy and dangerous. Jenya drank while staring fixedly at him, his gaze never shifting away. In the next second, it was as if something had hooked him. Without thinking, he reached out his hand. But before his hand could touch, Kwon Taek-ju clamped down on his wrist. The man's face was so dark it was terrifying, and he gave a direct warning. "You lay a finger on him and you're done." His wrist was squeezed so hard it hurt. Yet Jenya was even more confused. Why was he attracted to Kwon Taek-ju? His throat was even dry, and his heartbeat was out of rhythm. He also had no intention of wronging himself, so he simply sat down and directly joined the card game. But this situation of being stuck in the middle only made Kwon Taek-ju feel more and more irritated as he sat there, because his position was just like the one being pressed underneath. Yet Jenya insisted on pressing down on him, refusing to let go, his smile turning even more wicked. Early the next morning, Jenya went out. Kwon Taek-ju looked very upset and forced himself to focus on work, not to think about what had happened the night before. Very soon he realized that the North Korean technician, Hong Yo-UK, was not in the room. He thought Hong Yo-UK had gone to the toilet, but after waiting 30 minutes he still hadn't come back. Had he realized he was being watched? Kwon Taek-ju decided to go and check. Then he passed through the sleeper carriage and walked on to the dining car, all the way scanning everyone's expressions and movements. He couldn't help cursing inwardly. Forget not being able to find Hong Yo-UK, but how come Jenya is missing too? He stopped in front of the tightly closed toilet door. The toilet? But the train was about to arrive at the station, In theory, its use should be prohibited. The more Gwon Taek-ju thought about it, the more wrong it felt, and he frowned as he walked closer to inspect it. At that moment, a man silently circled around behind him. Gwon Taek-ju spun around instantly, raising his hand to strike first. But in the next second, another person suddenly attacked him from behind. His head hurt so badly it felt like it would explode, and his whole body crashed to the ground. Just before he lost consciousness, he seemed to see Jenya's figure, that wild yet strikingly cold face. The ridiculous thing was, the few times he'd crawled back from the brink of death, it had actually all been orchestrated by that arms tycoon. Even worse, the man had been leading him around by the nose. Not long ago, when Gwon Taek-ju was tracking the North Korean technician Hong Yeo-uk, someone knocked him out cold from behind. Now that he had just woken up, he realized he was inside a car that was moving. Beside him, Jenya even sighed. "You're finally awake." Gwon Taek-ju pressed his head and asked in a low voice, "What on earth happened?" But the man wasn't in a hurry to explain, instead mocking him, "It's better if you don't know. Otherwise you'll feel ashamed." Gwon Taek-ju, extremely annoyed, "Cut the crap, out with it." Only then did the man tell him, "When I was looking for someone, I saw you lying at the restroom door." Gwon Taek-ju immediately pressed, "Did you see the attacker's face clearly?" Jenya propped up his chin and vaguely countered, "Should I say I did? After all, I beat that person's face so badly it was unrecognizable." Gwon Taek-ju glared at him in anger and sneered, "You're useless. You didn't help at all." Then he asked Jenya again, "Those two who attacked me, have you found out who they are?" But the man said, "Just some irrelevant racists." Gwon Taek-ju was all the more confused on the spot. In his view, one of them had to be Hong Yeo-uk, because he had searched the entire train from end to end and still hadn't found that man. The next second, he suddenly remembered, before passing out, he seemed to have seen Jenya. So he immediately tensed up and stared at the man, asking, "Where did you go just now during that period of time?" But Jenya stayed very calm and asked back, "Are you suspecting me?" Gwon Taek-ju simply admitted, "Yes. At a critical moment, I couldn't find you." And the man half-truthfully explained that during that time he had been in the driver's cab the whole while, because he had noticed even earlier that Hong Yeo-uk had disappeared. So he went to ask the attendant, and only then did he learn that Hong Yeo-uk had used the excuse of changing his destination to go look for the driver. Gwon Taek-ju immediately thought, the person Hong Yeo-uk was supposed to meet was the driver. Sure enough, Jenya confirmed his suspicion on the spot. Ninev's contact really was the driver, essentially a piece of bait. But Hong Yeo-uk hadn't gotten off the train according to procedure at all. He had left halfway by directly boarding a helicopter. For the moment, Gwon Taek-ju believed the man's account, because at that time, the train was about to enter the station. Even if the driver had deliberately slowed down in order to see Hong Yeo-uk off, no one would have suspected anything. Gwon Taek-ju clenched his fist. Was he really just going to let the man get away like that? Suppressing his anger, he looked at Jenya and directly demanded, "You just let him go like that?" Jenya aggrievedly shot back, "You expected me to grab hold of a helicopter that was already flying away? Besides, it doesn't matter whether I caught it or not." Hearing this, Gwon Taek-ju let out a cold sneer. "Where does your confidence come from?" The next second, a tracker was tossed into his hand. Two little dots on it were constantly blinking. It turned out Jenya had already prepared a backup plan. This arms dealer, who could mingle freely in both the underworld and the legitimate world, never played by the rules. He even used a stapler to stitch up his wife's wound. Gwon Taek-ju tracked that North Korean technician all the way, but he was knocked out from behind by the enemy. When he opened his eyes again, he was already lying in Jenya's car. The man asked if his head still hurt and said he had already stapled it up for him. Gwon Taek-ju touched the back of his head and instantly had a bad feeling. He desperately wished that this wound had been treated by a professional doctor. So, clinging to a sliver of hope, he went to ask Jenya again, "Who exactly handled it?" "Me. As for that guy, just forget it, let him be." I just had to say with a bit of tsundere pride, "That was my doing." Then I even described the whole process in vivid detail. "Back then your scalp was split open 7 centimeters, blood was everywhere. I changed your clothes, and then used a stapler to close the wound. The soft, squishy feeling was just like driving nails into flesh." Gwon Taek-ju listened with his teeth almost grinding to dust, his whole body trembling, sharp stabs of pain shooting through the back of his head. He immediately changed the subject and asked whether Jenya had said goodbye to Ruiju before leaving, but Jenya just looked puzzled. "Who's that?" Gwon Taek-ju patiently explained. "It's that French woman you brought back. You said you'd never play cards with the same person twice, but you ended up playing with her 3 times. After hearing this, Jenya gave a soft smile and said that woman was exactly Gwon Taek-ju's ideal type. because Kwon Taek-ju had personally said he liked women with big, full breasts. Kwon Taek-ju's heart jolted violently. What? Only then did he realize that Jenya had tricked Ruiju into coming here entirely because of her. At the same time, the image of that man pinning him down flashed through his mind again. Kwon Taek-ju's face turned livid as he desperately told himself, "Hurry up and forget it." But the more he tried to suppress it, the more stifled and fired up he felt. So he simply asked Jenya, "Do you have abs?" The man looked puzzled, not understanding why he was asking that. Kwon Taek-ju immediately followed up, "Once the mission's over, I'll personally help you train a six-pack." The man heard the implication in his words and burst into laughter on the spot. He even said with great enthusiasm, "I'm really looking forward to that day." A moment later, the two of them followed the tracker to a castle deep in the mountains and forest. But the place was full of surveillance and weapons. Kwon Taek-ju said in a low voice, "We can't force our way in." Jenya deliberately provoked him. "Why can't you?" That line instantly lit his fuse. Kwon Taek-ju's face darkened as he snapped back, "You got 9 lives or something?" Hearing this, the man lifted his chin arrogantly. This was definitely not a compliment. Afterward, the two of them decided to stay nearby so it would be convenient to observe from close range. But halfway there, Jenya suddenly stopped the car and switched to walking into the snow on foot. Wearing only a single layer, Kwon Taek-ju was instantly frozen and started shivering. That little bit of scheming from the arms dealer was entirely spent on figuring out how to secretly check out his wife's figure. 1 second, he was still driving around looking for a hotel. The next second, he parked the car and forcibly dragged his wife into the winter cold. Kwon Taek-ju was shivering so hard that only one thought remained in his mind. "Let me take a hot bath. Fast." Just when he was about to turn into an icicle, a hotel finally appeared in the distance. Kwon Taek-ju was overjoyed and rushed straight inside in one breath. Shivering, he asked the owner to give them a room. The owner looked at him. "Just one room?" The man immediately got worked up, raised 2 fingers, and strongly demanded 2 rooms. But the owner replied very bluntly, "There's only one left now." Hearing this, Kwon Taek-ju was stunned on the spot, while Jenya, who had just come in, curled his lips into a smile. A moment later, the two of them were sitting around a round table. Kwon Taek-ju just felt exhausted. He had thought that once they got off the train, he wouldn't have to stay with Jenya anymore. With this guy next to him, he simply couldn't sleep in peace. Even if this man said he was only interested in Anastasia's design plans. But along the way, this lunatic had been messing around like he was playing a game. He would even kill people on a whim. Kwon Taek-ju stared at Jenya warily. This man acts purely on interest. Once his interest is gone, the gun barrel might very well turn toward Kwon Taek-ju. And while the man was still scheming, Jenya suddenly leaned in, stared at him and asked, "What bad idea are you cooking up this time?" Kwon Taek-ju's heart tightened, and he insisted he was just sorting out his thoughts. But Jenya let out a snort of a laugh, clearly not buying it. Kwon Taek-ju immediately yanked the topic back and countered by asking Jenya, "Do you know whose castle it is that Hong Yo UK went into?" Jenya smiled casually and gave him the answer outright. He said, "Just by looking at the pattern on the front gate you can tell. That's the Bogdanov family mansion." Hearing this, Kwon Taek-ju finally relaxed. They hadn't gone to the wrong place. But Jenya just wouldn't focus on the serious matter, suddenly bringing up the Russian-style sauna here and smoothly inviting Kwon Taek-ju to go with him. Zhe instantly recalled the numb, bone-chilling feeling from the snow just now, and this suggestion made his heart race. Yet the idea of bearing it all with this lunatic made him hesitate on instinct. Stranger still, Jenya had never shown his body. Even when playing cards, he always kept his shirt on. The more he thought about it, the fishier it felt. So Kwon Taek-ju simply took it as going to check things out and nodded in agreement. When they got to the sauna, Kwon Taek-ju couldn't help complaining. Jenya had vanished again, running off in search of vodka. The room was surging with heat. Just as he was thinking this, he heard footsteps approaching from outside, and Kwon Taek-ju instinctively looked toward the door. His heart sank. The secret Jenya was hiding about his body was about to be exposed. The door was pushed open and Jenya walked in. But that unmistakable thermos cup in his hand instantly left Kwon Taek-ju completely dumbfounded. An arms dealer boss with bad intentions toward his own wife ends up getting ruthlessly taught a lesson by said wife. And yet he's still grinning from ear to ear. Jenya dragged Kwon Taek-ju off to go steam in the sauna together. And Kwon Taek-ju actually agreed to it. Now he was sitting in the sauna, still complaining. Jenya went off searching for vodka again and vanished without a trace. Just as he was thinking this, the door was suddenly pushed open. Jenya walked in, staring straight at the thermos cup. Kwon Taek-ju was stunned on the spot. "Isn't that way too big? An extra large size?" Jenya sat down very naturally, and Gwon Taekju's gaze moved along with him. Jenya casually passed the bottle of liquor over, just in time to block his line of sight. He even deliberately reminded Gwon Taekju that he'd better rein in his thoughts. If a thermos cup can get bigger, then no matter who you give it to, it can warm them up just the same. Gwon Taekju grew even more annoyed and grumbled outright. This guy is spouting nonsense again. Yet he still couldn't help sweeping his gaze over Jenya's body from the corner of his eye. There were no scars, so why did he keep himself covered up so tightly? Thinking of this, Gwon Taekju simply teased him. You were pretending to be so reserved before. I thought you were hiding some kind of good stuff. The man deliberately asked back with nasty humor. Do you really want to see his holy body that much? Gwon Taekju almost took a swing at him, fuming inside. How can every single thing this guy says be so irritating? And just as he relaxed a little and let down his guard, lowering his head to drink, the man, however, looked him up and down without scruple, Jenya's gaze growing dark and heavy. With malice still in it, he licked the corner of his mouth. The next second, he leaned down closer and said ambiguously, It's such a pity that Gwon Taekju ended up on a man's body. As soon as the words fell, Gwon Taekju was furious to the point of exploding and grabbed a tree branch to whip it at him. He watched as the man's face was slapped to the side. Gwon Taekju's heart sank. Great, is this guy about to blow up? Sure enough, Jenya suddenly grabbed his wrist. He pushed him straight against the wall so he couldn't move. But when he looked at this dark-skinned beauty who was both cute and sexy, Jenya's anger slowly changed in flavor, turning into desire. Gwon Taekju countered with an over-the-shoulder throw. After a loud bang, the air fell silent in an instant. Gwon Taekju bent down to pick up the towel that had fallen to the ground. But suddenly he heard Jenya's hearty laughter. And Gwon Taekju frowned and lifted his eyes to look over, only to see that lunatic grinning without the slightest restraint, like a child who had just gotten candy. Gwon Taekju's face was full of disdain as he raised his hand to push the door open and leave. But then he heard Jenya drawling behind him, teasing, Going to call your mom? Gwon Taekju raised one finger and replied coldly, Yeah. I'm going to complain to my mom and have her come teach you a lesson. After saying that, he pushed the door open and left. And that one sentence instead made the man laugh even more recklessly. After he walked a long way, a chill crept into his heart. If Jenya hadn't been distracted just now, he wouldn't have been able to resist at all. And that man never shows mercy to his partners in crime. So he has to finish the mission as soon as possible and shake this guy off right away. Once the sauna was over, however, the arms tycoon still couldn't get this little spy out of his mind. He even wanted to trade a packet of instant noodles for a chance to cop a feel. Early in the morning, Gwon Taekju went to scout out Bogdanov's residence. But the place was guarded like an ironclad fortress. Aside from the main gate, he simply couldn't find any other way in. What on earth is hidden inside that would make them set up such an over-the-top defensive net? Gwon Taekju returned to the hotel with this question in mind. Yet he couldn't swallow a single bite of the hotel breakfast. It only made him crave noodle soup even more. Jenya suddenly walked in, and Gwon Taekju took the chance to report the results of scouting Bogdanov's residence. He had barely started when he froze up completely. He saw Jenya standing there like a savior wreathed in light, actually carrying a packet of instant noodles in his hand. Gwon Taekju, both expectant and nervous, reached out his hand and asked where this thing had come from. Jenya said it was left behind by that Korean guy from before. Before the words had even faded, Gwon Taekju reached out to grab it, but Jenya dodged away in a flash. Then, like teasing a kitten, he used the instant noodles to lure Gwon Taekju into pouncing back and forth. Before long, Gwon Taekju glared at him angrily and coldly ordered him to hand over the instant noodles. Jenya, however, curled his lips into a wicked smile and drawled, "Looks like you really do like them." Then he went ahead and heated up the instant noodles himself, adding that he couldn't just let Gwon Taekju eat them for free. Smelling the aroma, Gwon Taekju's heart sank. This man was definitely going to name an outrageous condition, so he couldn't agree, but that smell was pushing him right to the edge of losing control, and in that very second while he was still torn, the pot of steaming hot noodles crashed straight into his line of sight. Gwon Taekju was so hungry that his stomach was growling. He immediately dug at the noodles with his fork, only for the man to nimbly dodge away again. Gwon Taekju's temper flared, and he warned him that if he didn't eat now, the noodles would get mushy. Jenya just shrugged, as if it didn't matter. Gwon Taekju fell silent for 2 seconds, then finally admitted defeat. He picked up the pot of soup noodles, which counted as tacitly accepting Jenya's terms, and then he wolfed them down, his stomach feeling much better all at once. But Jenya suddenly circled around behind him. He even ordered him not to move. Gwon Taekju thought this demand was far too simple, so he didn't think much of it and just kept his head down, eating his noodles. But the next second, his whole body jolted. The man had touched a place he shouldn't have, and his breathing was getting closer and closer. Just then, the monitor suddenly went off. It turned out that the monitoring device on Hong Yeo-uk's body had disappeared. Kwon Taek-ju patted Jenya and casually thanked him for the instant noodles. After speaking, he turned back to the mission, his tone light, his movements light as well. He quietly watched the man's departing back, then quietly pushed those faint emotions back down. Jenya raised his hand, let out a low chuckle, and only felt that he had lost both the wife and the soldiers. The unruly little spy had almost discovered the true identity of the arms tycoon. But with just a few offhand words, the man had led him around again. While Jenya was out gathering information, Kwon Taek-ju lay on the bed, sighing that he could finally rest for a bit. Suddenly, a phone began to vibrate and ring, and Kwon Taek-ju realized it wasn't his own phone that was ringing. So he followed the sound and found Jenya's phone. Kwon Taek-ju's hand slipped, and he casually entered the password the man had used in the armory. The phone actually unlocked. In that moment, however, he hesitated, because he didn't like prying into other people's privacy, nor did he want to meddle in other people's affairs. But unfortunately, this person was his partner, and he had also begun to suspect the other's true purpose. Did Jenya really join this collaboration just for the design blueprints? Kwon Taek-ju took out his laptop and connected the data cable. Luckily, he had a hacking program that could transfer all the intelligence from the phone without leaving any trace of its use. But just as he opened that text message from a moment ago, he suddenly froze. On the screen it said, "The error in number 29 has already been resolved, and the result will be announced in 2 days. Please make sure to come." Kwon Taek-ju's expression gradually darkened. The problem with number 29 had only happened recently, and judging from the text message, the recipient should be someone involved in the R&D. But why would Jenya receive this text message? Who exactly is he? An unhappy face immediately rebuked him on the spot for being meddlesome, and Kwon Taek-ju's whole body trembled. He only heard Jenya say righteously, "As long as Kwon Taek-ju asks, he will openly show it to him." Only then did Kwon Taek-ju breathe a sigh of relief and press the man, asking what on earth was going on. Jenya then explained. This was a trick he played back when they went to Bogdanov's house. At the time he had mentioned to Kwon Taek-ju that he had met a woman and had implanted a small program in her phone. This program could send a virus to other contacts via text messages. And the fortunate thing was that she seemed to be in frequent contact with her family, so there were a lot of contact messages left on her phone. As he spoke, Jenya generously handed the phone over. Kwon Taek-ju naturally took it, and at a glance it was indeed just as the man had said. Most of the messages were texts exchanged with the Bogdanov family. So Jenya had not lied to him. But Kwon Taek-ju still held back his anger and asked directly, "Why did you hide this from me?" Jenya, however, bit back at him instead. "When have you ever treated me as a partner? Since you don't trust me, why should I show you the classified information?" The unruly little spy, in order to confirm the true identity of the arms tycoon, directly hacked into the other man's phone. As a result, he flipped the car on the spot, caught red-handed, and at this moment the arms tycoon's eyes looked wounded. The man grabbed the little spy's hand that was trying to close the incriminating evidence. He leaned into the other's ear, his voice low as he complained, "We're only temporary partners, but you hack my phone. That's your complete lack of trust in me." With Jenya's warm breath at his ear, Kwon Taek-ju felt awkward all over. He said nothing, just raised his hand and snapped the laptop shut with a "pa." But in the next second, Jenya only let out a soft sigh. "If you're this indifferent, you'll hurt me." In his heart, Kwon Taek-ju immediately grumbled. This guy is spouting nonsense again. He immediately dragged the topic back to business. "They're going to gather soon. We have to sneak into the castle before the meeting." Then he asked again, "Do we move at noon or at night?" Jenya, however, looked completely unconcerned. "Either is fine." Kwon Taek-ju felt utterly helpless and couldn't help snapping at him. "Do you think a spy mission is a casual stroll? At least make a thorough plan." Jenya instead laughed. "You're just used to sneaking around like a mouse, but I have a way to walk in openly and above board." Kwon Taek-ju flared up at once. "Are you still expecting the enemy to say welcome to you?" The man pressed his phone down and explained faintly, "I have a hacker program that hasn't been released yet. It can spread via text messages like a virus and conveniently pull back more intelligence from enemies. Who wouldn't want something like that?" After hearing this, Kwon Taek-ju understood. Jenya wanted to use the hacking software as a bargaining chip to knock on the door of the Bogdanov family. Sure enough, the man laid his cards on the table. He was originally an arms dealer, and no one would doubt his goods, especially with his brand of hard-edged persuasion. Kwon Taek-ju still couldn't help but press on, This is your core secret. Are you really willing to trade it away? Genya merely shrugged, his tone very light. Compared with Anastasia, this bit of secrecy is nothing. Then he took out a photo and pointed it out to Gwon Taek-ju. This is the owner of the castle, Surugi-ai. He is a distant relative of the Bogdanov family's second young master, and his obsession with weapons borders on madness. Hearing this, Gwon Taek-ju laughed with a hint of mockery. Seen this way, the success rate of this infiltration mission into the castle was actually higher. Partners carrying out the same espionage mission, yet they just had to be rivals guarding against each other. Even if this lunatic managed to explain why enemy text messages showed up on the phone without leaving a single loophole, Gwon Taek-ju still forced down his unease and remained suspicious of Genya's identity. Around midnight, after Genya had fallen sound asleep, Gwon Taek-ju quietly went to find the waiter, using the excuse that he needed to call his mother, and borrowed their landline. Click. Before long, he dialed the number of that hacker friend. Beep, beep, beep. The longer he waited, the more anxious he became until the call was finally picked up. The hacker was clearly stunned, not expecting his senior to reach out so suddenly. Gwon Taek-ju didn't explain much, only saying that he needed the other man to help him look into someone's identity. The hacker opened the email, saw Genya's photo, and frowned as he asked, "Who is this person?" Gwon Taek-ju warily swept his gaze around the surroundings and only said it was someone he had recently gotten involved with, and that he had to find out his identity as soon as possible. With that, he hung up the phone immediately. The stone weighing on Gwon Taek-ju's heart finally dropped. His steps also slowed, and he strolled back at an easy pace. But halfway back, he saw that the kitchen lights were blazing. Was a waiter secretly sneaking food? He couldn't help taking a step closer, then suddenly froze. Genya was speaking softly with the waiter. The man turned his head, his gaze landing on him, and spoke in a calm tone. "Who were you just calling?" Without changing his expression, Gwon Taek-ju lied that it was his mother, but Genya just let out 2 short chuckles, and Gwon Taek-ju understood at once. This man didn't believe him at all, so he simply decided to leave first, to get away from this inexplicable sense of pressure. After that, Gwon Taek-ju politely thanked the waiter, then casually asked, "Genya, you're not going to sleep yet?" The man had just said he wanted a drink, but Gwon Taek-ju turned away with utter disinterest, as if he'd heard nonsense. What he didn't notice was that behind him, Genya had been staring at him, his gaze sinking bit by bit, like the night. After returning to the bedroom, however, Gwon Taek-ju was even more unsettled. He forced himself to fall asleep quickly, to rest up for tomorrow's mission. But the more he urged himself, the more awake he became. Not long after, the lock clicked softly. The sound of the door opening came, and Genya slowly walked in. The man stood by Gwon Taek-ju's bed for a long time, terrifyingly silent, as if he were thinking about something or suppressing something. Gwon Taek-ju lay with his back to him. Even his breathing lightened, afraid that a single rhythm would give him away. Then, Genya climbed into bed. Only then did Gwon Taek-ju dare to take a deep breath, his heartbeat pounding against his eardrums, almost out of control. He opened his eyes again to confirm and only then felt he could finally sleep. This wildly feral little spy was simply a top-tier dark beauty. Not only had he caught the eye of that psycho arms dealer boss, he'd also attracted the attention of that old man on the enemy side. At daybreak, Gwon Taek-ju was already fully dressed, ready to head out for the mission. Genya suddenly came close and lifted his hand to drape his own coat over Gwon Taek-ju's shoulders. Gwon Taek-ju froze for a moment, then raised his eyes to look at the mirror. In the mirror, he looked like a child sneaking into an adult's clothes, ridiculously comical. And Genya, facing his reflection in the mirror, was giving him a wicked grin. Gwon Taek-ju's face darkened. He impatiently pushed his coat aside, cursing in his heart. This guy is messing with him again. A moment later, the two of them set off for Bogdanov's residence. But they did not go in immediately. They stayed on watch in the area, observing all the way until midnight. Only when they pretended to step into the surveillance range did the front gate of the residence automatically open. Gwon Taek-ju immediately felt that something was wrong. The next second, several men in black surrounded them, raised their pistols, and ordered the two to get out of the car for inspection. While the bodyguards were roughly searching, the front gate of the residence suddenly opened again. Gwon Taek-ju's pupils contracted. He hadn't expected to meet the master of this place, Surugi-ai, so soon. He had heard that when Surugi-ai was a congressman he had been dogged by scandals, and that was why he had hidden himself away in such a remote place. And the weapons of 29 were also very likely stashed here. Surugi-ai walked up to Genya, raised an eyebrow and asked, "What brings you here?" Genya smiled casually and said he had something good he wanted to show him, and wished to go inside to talk in detail. Surugi glanced at Kwon Taek-ju and showed an embarrassed expression. The house was too messy, not very suitable for receiving guests. Kwon Taek-ju knew very well that this was just an excuse. Hong Yo-UK was living here, and 29 was also very likely hidden inside. Jenya immediately stepped forward, speaking in a very firm tone. "You're definitely going to like this." The little old man rubbed his chin and thought for a few seconds, then finally nodded and agreed to the man's proposal. As soon as he entered the room, Surugi first asked about Kwon Taek-ju's identity. Jenya took the opportunity to introduce him. "He is an intelligence officer from Korea." Kwon Taek-ju raised his hand and reported his own name, saying he was called Rim Dae-hyung, exactly the name of his superior, Rim Bujang. Surugi politely took Kwon Taek-ju's hand and offered a welcome, but in the second their palms touched, the little old man deliberately scratched the man's palm. A wave of disgust rose in Kwon Taek-ju's heart. Yet Jenya happened to see this scene and even let out a quiet laugh. This little spy was too handsome, and his figure far too eye-catching. Anyone who had seen him would find it hard to forget him. Even the little old man from the number 1 mafia family could not escape this kind of attraction. At this moment, Kwon Taek-ju followed Jenya into the enemy's fortress. Jenya pretended they were talking business, saying he had brought the latest eavesdropping program developed by Han Nation and Beautiful Nation. As long as the other party made calls or sent texts, the malicious code would automatically be transferred over. Then all the information in the enemy's phone could be directly controlled. After listening, Surugi frowned skeptically. "Isn't this just a movie plot?" Jenya handed his phone over, his tone calm. "This isn't a movie. This is reality." Surugi took the phone, and the next second his eyes widened. The information on his own phone had actually been stolen. This kind of technology really existed. But why would Jenya sell something this powerful to him? Thinking of this, Surugi rubbed his hands and mumbled that he needed to think about it some more. Jenya agreed readily, then added, "I'll give you 1 day to think it through. I'll be waiting here." Kwon Taek-ju understood. Jenya was going to turn the trick back on them and simply stay here for a day. A moment later, when no one was paying attention, Kwon Taek-ju quietly tossed the ray scanner out of the window. Very soon, he obtained the scan map of the fine residence, with many hidden spaces marked on it. Then he shared the map with Jenya, and they agreed to split up to search for 29. Kwon Taek-ju climbed into the ventilation duct. As he inched his way to the area above the corridor, he accidentally made a noise at the vent. The bodyguards were instantly on alert. One of them prodded the vent with a long gun, but found nothing. The other simply assumed it was a rat causing trouble. They didn't know that right beneath the vent, a man was hanging in midair, his arms trembling as he strained not to fall. But he couldn't hold on for long. His hands slipped, and there was another sound. Kwon Taek-ju held his breath as hard as he could and slowly looked down. Thankfully, the two of them had already gone far away. Before long, he felt his way to the basement, but he saw only a piano covered in dust. His spirits instantly deflated. After all that trouble, he hadn't found anything. If he didn't go back now, he'd blow his cover, so he had no choice but to withdraw for the moment. But when he returned to the bedroom ceiling, he heard a knock at the door, and Kwon Taek-ju tensed up instantly, his heart sinking. Was it Surugi who had come, or a servant? Only to see Surugi suddenly burst into the room. The little old man found no one inside and immediately became alert, searching all around as he walked. The next second, however, he saw Kwon Taek-ju coming out of the bathroom bare-chested. Surugi's eyes widened as he stared greedily at the man, unable to look away. He paused for a few seconds before finally stammering out an invitation for Kwon Taek-ju to come to dinner. The defiant little spy actually ended up being taken advantage of by the enemy's little old man, and that deranged arms tycoon just stood off to the side, watching the show. Just a moment ago, Kwon Taek-ju had climbed into the ventilation duct. He was doing it to secretly scout out the hiding place of Phase 29-5. Yet at that very moment, the enemy's little old man Surugi barged into his room. Finding no one inside, Surugi immediately became suspicious and prepared to look further in. As a result, the next second he saw Kwon Taek-ju coming out of the bathroom bare-chested, his lines tight and clean, making one's gaze unconsciously lock onto him. Surugi froze for several seconds before suddenly remembering that he had come to invite Kwon Taek-ju to dinner. But Kwon Taek-ju's expression was terrible. He directly and irritably questioned him. "How did you end up over here by the bathroom?" The old man hurriedly apologized, the atmosphere so tense with awkwardness that it felt tight, and he could only slink out dejectedly. Only when the sound of footsteps had completely faded did Kwon Taek-ju finally breathe a sigh of relief, secretly glad that he had come back at just the right time. But he didn't know that at this very moment, In the living room, Genya was chatting quite familiarly with the enemy. The man asked him in a low voice, "How is everything progressing?" With a look of pride, Tsurugi said that from design to revision he had spent too much time and effort, but now he felt very accomplished. He even added, "Something I made with my own hands will never betray anyone." At this, he suddenly turned his head and asked Genya, "When do you plan to make the results public?" The man, however, was very calm and merely replied lightly, "I'm still thinking about it. It might take a few more years." Just then, Gwon Taek-ju came down the stairs, and the conversation was cut off in an instant. Gwon Taek-ju walked over and sat down beside Hong Yeo-uk. The man gave him a polite nod, but the next second he shot Genya a fierce glare, then stood up and left. The more Gwon Taek-ju looked, the more wrong it seemed. He couldn't figure out why Hong Yeo-uk was targeting Genya like this. Could it be that Genya had been discovered while probing just now? As he was frowning in thought, Tsurugi explained, "Hong Yeo-uk is my lover. You don't need to mind it." The meaning was obvious. Hong Yeo-uk was jealous. Immediately after that, Tsurugi asked Gwon Taek-ju again, "The hacking program you brought, has it already been put into use in both South Korea and the United States?" Gwon Taek-ju flatly refused to answer and said coolly, "Aside from the product itself, I won't answer any other questions." Tsurugi immediately apologized, saying he shouldn't have talked about work at the dinner table. But the very next second, with a suggestive tone, he asked Gwon Taek-ju what hobbies he had in his free time. Gwon Taek-ju instantly became alert, a tightness rising in his chest. Why is this man so curious about a stranger? Thinking this, he glared at Genya. This guy not only refused to help, he was even standing by watching the show. Genya suddenly stood up, said he was going to rest, and walked off with a wicked smile before the words had even fully left his mouth. In his heart, Gwon Taek-ju cursed. Not an ounce of partner loyalty. Tsurugi asked him again, "Are you married?" Gwon Taek-ju coldly shot back, "Does that question have anything to do with our deal?" Tsurugi was silent for a few seconds. Then he narrowed his eyes and, with an unsettling air, slowly reached out to touch Gwon Taek-ju's hand. Gwon Taek-ju was instantly disgusted, shot to his feet, and used the excuse of having something to do so he could go upstairs first. Watching Gwon Taek-ju's retreating back, Tsurugi clenched his fists, his face darkening with a gloomy cast, his eyes full of resentment. Right at that moment, the servant brought out a chocolate cake, as if hinting at something. Have you ever seen such a ruthless arms tycoon? He actually lets his wife rely on her looks to seduce the old man on the enemy's side. Just now, Gwon Taek-ju forced down his anger and finally managed to pull away and say goodbye to that Tsurugi who clearly meant him harm. But as soon as he returned to his room, he discovered that Genya had once again trespassed into his bedroom, striking the pose of the master, urging him to come in and telling him not to be so polite. Gwon Taek-ju forcibly suppressed his dissatisfaction, dragged his attention back to the mission, and asked Genya how the investigation was going. Genya thought for a long time before remembering the serious business, then said with a grin, "He found a safe in the study, and inside there were only gold bars." After hearing this, Gwon Taek-ju let out a low sigh. "Looks like 29 isn't in the study, which means there are only two places left, the attic at the top of the tower and the secret room in Tsurugi's bedroom. The problem is, neither of those two places is somewhere you can just walk into. But tomorrow is the mafia gathering, so they have to finish the mission tonight." Thinking of this, Gwon Taek-ju's brows knit together, and his irritation could no longer be contained. He simply suggested, "Grab Tsurugi, give him a good beating, and force him to talk." Genya, however, let out a cold laugh. "If you really do that, you'll be riddled with bullets before you even get near Tsurugi. This place is defended like hell." Then his tone sank, as if deliberately keeping them in suspense. "If the hard way won't work, then use the soft way." Gwon Taek-ju instantly understood what he meant. Lure Tsurugi? But where would he find a beauty? While Gwon Taek-ju was still relentlessly arguing back, Genya used those dark, deep eyes of his to stare straight at Gwon Taek-ju. The next second, he closed in with a hint of ambiguity, leaving Gwon Taek-ju even more confused. Genya bent down, leaned close to his ear, and whispered, "I heard Tsurugi likes men." As he spoke, one hand hovered under Gwon Taek-ju's face, coaxing him with obvious ill intentions. "And he especially likes handsome, dark-skinned guys. The way he looks at you is off." When Gwon Taek-ju heard this, he immediately pushed Genya away and flatly refused. Genya's smile only deepened. Instead, he raised the stakes. "As long as you hook Tsurugi, you can get into his bedroom. Maybe once he gets carried away, he'll spill all the secrets about 29. After you get the information, you knock him out, and people outside will just assume nothing happened in that room." Hearing this, Kwon Taek-ju began to waver, but the scenes of Surugiai harassing him surged back again. His stomach tightened, and he only felt disgusted. So Kwon Taek-ju turned away and refused in an icy voice. Jenya suddenly tossed a tracker into his hand. He even made him guess. Why do you think Surugiai was creepily pacing back and forth outside your door? The dark-skinned beauty before him was clearly exhausted, with a faint flush still on his cheeks, like a shell that had been gnawed on by an arms tycoon until nothing was left inside. The little old man on the enemy side saw this and only grew more greedy. Jenya urged Kwon Taek-ju to go hook up with Surugiai and use this chance to find the hiding place of number 29. But this super straight man Kwon Taek-ju just refused outright. Jenya took a step closer with an unreadable look, lowering his voice to remind him. Do you know that a female being chased by many males makes people want to conquer her even more? But he also didn't know whether Jenya was talking about himself or about Surugiai. Just then, there was a knock at the door, and outside Surugiai asked if Kwon Taek-ju was asleep. Kwon Taek-ju answered without thinking that he wasn't asleep yet and was just about to open the door when Jenya suddenly grabbed his wrist hard. He slammed him against the cabinet, leaving Kwon Taek-ju full of question marks. Jenya suddenly started rubbing against his chocolate bar, a wicked smile at the corner of his mouth as he stared at him to watch his reaction. Jenya cooked him stroke by stroke, and Kwon Taek-ju was almost being steamed through. Kwon Taek-ju tried desperately to push him away, but Jenya directly pinned down all his struggles, showing no mercy. Kwon Taek-ju was both angry and anxious inside, but didn't dare make a sound, afraid Surugiai would suddenly burst in, and Jenya was still speeding up the cooking. Soon, a sweet fragrance rose from the chocolate cake. The taste kept hooking him, again and again, and he couldn't hold back from giving it a lick. Just as the cooking had come to a stop, Surugiai suddenly barged into the room. The moment he stepped through the door, he immediately sensed that something was off in the air. He saw Kwon Taek-ju's cheeks flushed red, looking as if he could barely stand. Beside him, Jenya was even being considerate, helping him straighten his clothes inch by inch. As soon as Surugiai appeared, that man instantly assumed the posture of a host, welcoming him as if he were in his own home. Then he found an excuse, saying he was there to borrow a book. After he finished speaking, he deliberately dragged out his tone. He glanced at Kwon Taek-ju, then turned around and left the Tong residence. Kwon Taek-ju was shaking with anger, cursing Jenya over and over in his heart. Bastard. But the next second, Surugiai suddenly reached out and directly grabbed his hand. He even said he wanted to show him something good and hinted in passing that it was an iron product all the countries were interested in. Kwon Taek-ju immediately seized the chance to follow this little old man and went all the way into his bedroom. In that moment, the little spy finally realized this partner who had lived and died alongside him was actually his greatest enemy. So from beginning to end, he'd been toyed with in the palm of this man's hand. Even just now, the enemy's little old man had used a good thing as an excuse to bring him straight into the bedroom. Kwon Taek-ju took the glass of liquor handed over by the other man, sipped it, and lowered his voice to ask, "Where is the thing?" Surugiai, however, complained to him in an ambiguous tone, telling him not to be so hasty. Kwon Taek-ju fell silent on the spot, his heart sinking. They're not even talking about the same thing, are they? He saw the little old man squinting at him, his gaze so sticky it was nauseating. He hurriedly downed his drink. Then the man started taking off his jacket, as if he was about to eat cake. Kwon Taek-ju instantly understood what he wanted to do, so Kwon Taek-ju could only pretend to go along at first, just to get the information clear. But in the end he really couldn't stand it, and flung the man away with a backhand for a full 2 li. Just then, his phone suddenly vibrated. It was his hacker friend calling. Kwon Taek-ju answered and asked directly, "How's the investigation into Jenya's identity going?" But the person on the other end was extremely agitated and instead asked him, "Who are you with right now?" Kwon Taek-ju was even more confused. Why is he asking that? Could it be that he's already hacked into the surveillance system here? Thinking about this, he walked while looking around, only to find that Surugiai was gone. Kwon Taek-ju's heart lurched, and he hurriedly went to look for the little old man's tracks. The next second, however, he was tackled straight to the ground. Surugiai was holding a syringe and drove it hard into his arm. Kwon Taek-ju clenched his teeth and struggled, desperately pressing down on the other man's hand to keep the liquid from being injected. He suddenly lashed out with a kick, knocking the man out on the spot. Then he immediately turned around and continued searching for the key to the secret room. Very quickly, he noticed on Surugiai's belt there was an electronic switch hanging. But just as he was about to press it, a wave of intense dizziness hit him. Kwon Taek-ju's legs went weak, and his whole body collapsed powerlessly to the ground. Only then did he understand that the injection just now had still entered his body. From the phone on the floor came his hacker friend's anxious voice, asking what had happened to him. But the next second, a hand reached over and directly cut off the call. Kwon Taek-ju looked up, and his sixth sense frantically warned him, run. Yet his body felt completely drained, so limp that he couldn't even stand up. He watched helplessly as Jenya approached with a wicked smile, even deliberately asking how he had managed to get himself into such a state. Right after, Jenya leaned down suggestively, his tone like he was teasing prey, and peeled back the truth bit by bit. The secret room's door slowly opened, and a family portrait instantly came into view. Kwon Taek-ju's gaze went unfocused, only feeling that everyone in the photo looked inexplicably familiar. And among them, that handsome man was Jenya. Kwon Taek-ju turned his head in terror, fixing a deathly stare on the man beside him. Using the last of his strength, he yanked open the other man's collar. On Jenya's chest, an eagle emblem was suddenly revealed. So he was actually Puzik Bogdanov, the man known as Kor. This young member of the Black Hand carried a morbid taste for cruelty in his very bones. What he wanted to see was this unruly man struggling inch by inch on the brink of life and death. And only at this moment did the little spy finally understand. He was just a toy in a con man's hands. But he still clung to a last shred of hope and asked in a trembling voice, "Why did you save me before?" The corners of Jenya's lips lifted as he gave a mocking smile. "Did I ever say I was saving you? You just read too much into it." Kwon Taek-ju's brows knitted tighter and tighter as his thoughts were forcibly dragged back to the past. Jenya had looked like a killer right from the start, yet he still chose to trust this man. All because headquarters had sent him a partner photo. But it wasn't as if he had never doubted Jenya's identity. After their first meeting, the hotel he was staying in was blown up. The moment he fell into the sea, this guy had almost killed him. In the Bogdanov family residence, the bug Jenya gave him suddenly malfunctioned, directly drawing the bodyguard's pursuit and killing intent. And on the train, some mysterious person knocked him out from behind. At this moment, Kwon Taek-ju hated his own stupidity. Jenya wanted to kill him, yet he thought the other man was saving him. But why did this guy go through so many twists and turns instead of just finishing him cleanly? With that question in mind, he stared fixedly at the man. Jenya saw through his confusion at a glance and, with a trace of malicious amusement, said, "Watching you struggle so desperately to stay alive is really entertaining." Rage surged in Kwon Taek-ju's chest. To this man, his life was nothing more than a toy. He bit out the words in a low voice, "Bastard." The next second, he swung a punch at Jenya. The man merely lifted his hand lightly and caught his wrist in a firm grip. There was a bloody gleam flashing in his predatory eyes. "First see the current situation clearly, then throw a punch." Before the words fell, he swung back his fist and smashed it into Kwon Taek-ju. Kwon Taek-ju was hit so hard his vision went black. But even so, he still gritted his teeth and struggled to escape. He forced himself. He must not die here. Yet this movement completely enraged Jenya. He suddenly clamped his hand around Kwon Taek-ju's neck. Kwon Taek-ju instantly couldn't breathe, his pupils gradually dilating. He knew very well that he was no match for this lunatic at all. Yet the man's earlier words suddenly echoed in his mind. He had said that Puzik Bogdanov had distinguished military merits, and that in the Black Head Party there was no one who didn't know him. So back then, Jenya had already been introducing himself. He had just failed to realize it at the time. This was so ridiculous that Kwon Taek-ju mocked himself inwardly, the corner of his mouth pulling into a laugh. But the fact that the man was on the verge of being strangled to death and could still laugh made Jenya feel as if his heart had been struck, his blood boiling once again. He changed his mind on the spot, pulled out a short knife, and drove it straight toward Kwon Taek-ju. But this man only stared wide-eyed, not afraid in the slightest. Jenya couldn't be bothered to scare him any further. He directly slit open the long pants and began to play cards recklessly. The defiant dark-skinned beauty, furious yet helpless, seemed to be constantly provoking the taste buds of the mafia. When Jenya took out the holy light big baby and thrust it toward Kwon Taek-ju, the man's eyes suddenly flew wide open, the pain so intense he couldn't squeeze out a single sound. And this madman even carried a streak of malicious amusement, forcing him to move a little, forcing him to see reality. Kwon Taek-ju glared fiercely at Jenya, vowing in his heart, he would definitely tear this bastard to pieces. His refusal to admit defeat happened to ignite Jenya's desire to conquer, and the man immediately intensified his assault. Just when Kwon Taek-ju felt like he was about to fall apart, he saw in the mirror on the ceiling his own wretched state. Jenya seemed to sense something and smiled in a way that was both wicked and infuriating. Kwon Taek-ju awkwardly turned his face away, not wanting to look anymore. But Genya pinched his face and forcibly pulled him back, making him see clearly just how embarrassed he was. "This mirror took me a lot of effort to install," Genya explained with malice. That sentence completely set Gwon Taek-ju off. He was shaking with rage and directly cursed the man as a bastard. Yet those curses, in the man's eyes, instead seemed like entertainment. With malice he praised Gwon Taek-ju as very tasty. Gwon Taek-ju endured it to his limit, raised his fist to strike, but was easily pinned down by the man. A guy with special agent training could figure out his prey's weaknesses and preferences in just a few seconds. At the very moment Gwon Taek-ju sensed something was wrong, the man gave a cold laugh and said, "Keep struggling. I never planned to let you live. How terrifying is it to be targeted by a mafia madman who's lost all control and turned vicious? 1 second, he's torturing you in the cruelest way possible. The next second, he was spouting what he thought were romantic sweet nothings again." The dark-skinned handsome guy, Gwon Taek-ju, had really experienced it firsthand. In Genya's violence and torture, he passed out many times, and every time he woke up he just felt like his body was about to fall apart. But the lunatic who was now full was in a great mood. He said he wanted to answer Gwon Taek-ju's questions, for after all, dying without knowing anything would be too unfair. When he said this, he even pretended to be considerate, lifting his hand to brush aside the messy hair on the man's forehead. He slowly let out a truth no one knew. Anesthesia didn't exist at all. Gwon Taek-ju jolted on the spot and immediately pressed him. Then what does 29 count as? 29 was just an explosive charge, and the so-called anesthesia research had already failed long ago. Gwon Taek-ju's eyes widened, and all at once his memories surged up. So Genya had deliberately and generously let him overhear intel about 29, just to mislead him. But he had thought that was the clue to anesthesia. Seeing the change in Gwon Taek-ju's expression, Genya kept twisting the knife. In order to develop anesthesia, they had already wasted too much money and manpower, and he didn't want to go on anymore. As he spoke, he tightened his palm more and more, as if he couldn't bear to let go. Gwon Taek-ju trembled with pain, his breathing completely thrown into chaos. Genya suddenly swerved the topic and brought up the origin of the name anesthesia. That was the last imperial princess of the Bear Country. There are many rumors about how she died, but some people firmly believe she will come back. Genya's hand was getting more and more restless, and Gwon Taek-ju finally reached his limit and coldly questioned what exactly he was trying to say. But Genya did not answer. He just obsessively kept telling his story. In the Bear Country's folk legends, there is an immortal god, Koshii. He kidnaps women, and he also kidnaps maidens. Warriors go to rescue them again and again, but fail every single time. And Koshii does indeed have a weakness. It's just that this secret is known only to himself. Just then, Genya leaned in suggestively, as if he were about to stuff the secret into his ear, and spoke in a low voice. In the end, Koshii still died, because he was bewitched by a beautiful woman and personally revealed his own weakness. At this point, the man's eyes were almost filled with desire, and he could not help but take a lick of the chocolate. Immediately after, he deliberately reminded him, "Although you are not a beauty, don't forget Koshii's weakness. On that vast expanse of land, there is an uninhabited castle, and Koshii's heart is hidden there." Driven to the very limit by repeated torment, Gwon Taek-ju had nothing left but surging rage. He did not realize at all that Genya, under the cover of 2 stories, this madman had been waiting all along, waiting for the day Gwon Taek-ju discovered it, waiting for the day the prey would strike back and bare its claws at him. This special operations mission directly trapped the unruly, dark-skinned beauty in the most miserable situation. The insane black guard party didn't just drain him dry. They even wanted to harvest his life after they were done eating, injecting poison into his body. Gwon Taek-ju quickly fell into a coma, his consciousness drifting, as if his whole being were slowly sinking to the bottom of the sea. In his ears was his father's call, reminding him not to forget that promise. He stared at that white shadow in front of him. Gwon Taek-ju thought he must have already stopped breathing, which was why he could see a soul. That soul suddenly gripped his neck, and in the next second it turned into Genya's face, sneering as she cursed him for being a stupid rabbit. Gwon Taek-ju jolted awake, his eyes flying open. Before he could gather his wits, he realized this was a hospital. Someone beside his ear asked, "Gokai, are you awake?" Gwon Taek-ju started, immediately turning his head, only to see a tall man standing by the bed. The man was wrapped in bandages all over, looking in terrible shape. Yet the more he looked, the more familiar he seemed. He looked like the person who had chased after him while bandaging him that day at the hotel. As Gwon Taek-ju tried to recall, he asked who the man was. The man mocked him on the spot, saying he couldn't even recognize his own partner. Kwon Taek-ju was suddenly at a loss for words. He remembered that headquarters had said they would assign him a partner, but the next day they sent the wrong photo. When he received Jenya's photo, that guy just happened to come up and flirt with him. So he took Jenya to be his partner. But how could headquarters have sent the wrong photo? The more Kwon Taek-ju thought about it, the more wrong it seemed. He then pressed the man further. Why didn't you reveal your identity earlier? The man immediately raised his voice in irritation. How did I ever get a chance to approach you? I could only watch helplessly while you stuck together with Bogdanov. It took so much effort to wait until you were alone. And as soon as I got close, you turned and ran like you'd seen a ghost. You nearly strangled me to death in the sea. You haven't forgotten that, have you? The more Kwon Taek-ju listened, the guiltier he felt. So he simply apologized earnestly and admitted that he had mistaken his partner's identity. If these words made the other man even angrier, then he could just hit him to vent it. Hearing this, the man's anger actually flared up even more, but the fists he had been clenching slowly loosened. After all, Kwon Taek-ju really was in a miserable state now. Kwon Taek-ju was taken aback. Do I really look that bad? As if suddenly thinking of something, he immediately checked his fingers. They were still there, just fractured. So Jenya didn't cut off his hand? The more he thought about it, the more wrong it felt, and he couldn't help but press on. How did I even survive? The man told him. While the organization was pursuing the people after Bogdanov, they found him by the river on Alho Island. The doctor said that if they had been any later, he would have been gone. After listening, Kwon Taek-ju let out a low, dry chuckle. Sure enough, that guy was completely unreliable. Then something else suddenly occurred to him, and he immediately reached for his neck. HM? He frowned and asked. I was injected with 210. How can I still be alive? His partner was even more puzzled and countered. Who told you that? Kwon Taek-ju blurted out. Jenya did. The man was taken aback on the spot. Even his tone changed. Why are you calling Bogdanov by his pet name? This sentence left Kwon Taek-ju completely dumbfounded. He had no idea what the other man was talking about. The next second, he remembered that this was exactly how Jenya had introduced himself when they first met. He had just failed to notice at the time that the guy's full name was Yevgeny Pushik Bogdanov, and Jenya was precisely the pet form of Yevgeny, which meant that calling him that was actually correct. Kwon Taek-ju rubbed his forehead irritably, unable to figure out what that guy was playing at, to just casually toss out his own pet name like that. In his mind appeared Jenya's thoroughly punchable face. The fire in Kwon Taek-ju's chest burned hotter and hotter. The next second, he slammed his fist hard onto the bed and roared, Damn it! The defiant little spy was really about to explode with anger. He had been completely played for a fool by that crafty enemy. Yet not only had he treated the man as a partner, he had even called that person by his pet name every single day. Once the truth came out, Kwon Taek-ju was instantly livid with shame. Damn it! He swung his fist again, pounding the hospital bed with a loud thudding noise. He flung the pillow aside, accidentally hitting his real partner, who was also startled by his outburst. His partner hurriedly lowered his voice to reassure him. Don't worry. Pushik only gave you a sedative, not 210. Kwon Taek-ju didn't explain much. He just forcibly pressed down his anger and asked in a cold voice, Who exactly is Pushik? His partner finally let out a breath of relief, then told him. That guy was from the Federal Bureau of the Bear Country. On the surface he does counter-espionage, but in secret he specializes in assassinations. On their side, the Alpha Division has 5 elite teams, each with around 200 people. But among them, there is one team with only a single member, that is Pushik Bogdanov. Hearing this, Kwon Taek-ju let out a low chuckle. Seems all the work for hundreds of people has to be handled by him alone. No wonder they call him a god. But the next second, he clenched his fist again, gritting his teeth as he complained. How can Bear Country tolerate such a maniac? After figuring out Jenya's identity, Kwon Taek-ju finally remembered to introduce himself, then asked what his partner's name was. Annoyed, his partner slapped his hand away and coldly reported his name. Salma. After saying that, he was about to leave, but Kwon Taek-ju called out to him, pressing for the next step of the operation plan. Salma's expression darkened, and he told him solemnly, Our mission failed this time. The medical expenses are the last bit of support. So once you're treated, go back home obediently. He turned to leave, but then as if suddenly remembering something, his steps paused. With ill intent, he teased. That guy seems to really like you. Look, even that place of yours got hurt. Hearing this, Kwon Taek-ju looked completely confused, not understanding at all what he was hinting at. But as waves of pain surged up, those memories he didn't want to revisit also rushed into his mind. He reacted in an instant, his pupils contracting sharply, rage surging straight up to his throat. The next second, an angry roar exploded, and the echo almost drowned out the entire hospital building. On the other side, Genya just felt a chill run down his back and immediately straightened up ramrod straight. Big Brother immediately asked him what was wrong, but Genya only scratched his ear indifferently and said that someone was cursing him behind his back. After listening, Big Brother raised his hand to rub his brow, his face full of helplessness. Everything he just said had been for nothing. Genya had treated it like wind in his ears and even tossed out a few idle remarks. And he had been cleaning up Genya's messes for more than 10 years now, ever since the first time he met this guy. In that moment he knew this was a maniac with terrifying destructive power. This mafia lunatic, mad down to his bones, had practically driven his own big brother insane. Looking at this younger brother in front of him, who was putting on an act of craziness and foolishness, Buladimiru only felt a splitting headache. No matter how big a disaster this kid caused, as long as it didn't involve the family, he could pretend it had never happened. But this time was different. This time, however, the matter was truly serious, and he recalled the first time they met. Genya had grinned and plucked out the peacock's feathers one by one, then mocked right to his face that this work wasn't fun at all. Whenever this kid came across something interesting, he would start wrecking it. Once he had completely destroyed it, he would immediately turn his gaze to the next fresh target. Because of this, their father had thrown him into a place where he could properly make use of this urge to destroy. Yet this guy had actually brought the enemy home to cause trouble. Buladimiru let out a low sigh. He should never have let Genya serve as Gazprom's representative in the first place. Who could have expected that the moment he turned around, he would start playing a spy game with a Korean agent? The man suppressed his anger and said coldly, "I've already cleaned up all the follow-up for you, and it's been made public outside." The official story given to the public is, at that time it was the Korean agent who abducted Genya and that official was killed on the spot while resisting. Ha! After hearing this, Genya only felt it was absurd. How could he possibly be kidnapped by that idiot Gwon Taek-ju? Yet this single question from Genya directly made Buladimiru so angry it was as if he had instantly aged 10 years. He hadn't expected that this was what his little brother was focusing on. He countered Genya. "Why didn't you just get rid of Gwon Taek-ju from the start?" Genya instead curled his lips, his tone full of aftertaste. "Because it was fun. Watching Gwon Taek-ju desperately struggle to stay alive was very interesting." Buladimiru immediately questioned him. "Then why didn't you clean him up completely, like you usually do? Brand him, then finish him off?" Genya listened without the slightest concern and shot back even more lightly. "What is Big Brother worried about? He just got lucky and was rescued by his companions. A man who can barely breathe, is he really still capable of striking back? Don't worry, he won't do something that cute. When a mafia member goes crazy, just how scheming can he be? Not only did he send that unruly little spy straight into the hospital, he even played his own big brother in the palm of his hand." At this moment, Genya was being interrogated by his big brother, one question after another. Buladimiru stared at him and asked, "How far has the development of anesthesia progressed?" Instead, he coldly countered, "What exactly are you all curious about? Is it the father or the prime minister or some other big shot?" He then mocked that those people were like dogs staring at a bone, which only made him feel irritated. "And just not long ago, some guy even rushed over, saying he wanted to avenge my father. But in the end, I cut off all 4 of his limbs. He looked absolutely hilarious like that." Hearing this, Buladimiru's head throbbed with pain, and he directly accused him. "Genya, did you just casually kill Hong Yo-UK like that?" The man merely curled his lips into a smile, as if saying, "What can you possibly do to me?" Then, in a voice full of mockery, he shot a question back at his older brother. "Do you regret sending me over there back then?" Buladimiru glared furiously at his younger brother. "Whether it's me or father, we both regret trusting you too much, thinking you would behave yourself." After hearing that, Genya immediately reminded him, "So stop drooling over what's mine. Up to now, I've only been letting you off the hook for the sake of brotherhood." Hearing this warning, the man fell silent, his fingers slowly clenching tight. Right at that moment his phone rang. What was stranger, Genya's phone also started vibrating at that exact same second. Buladimiru instantly became alert. He picked up both phones for a look. The incoming call was from the very same number. The man exploded on the spot and demanded of his younger brother, "You're even monitoring your own family?" Genya couldn't be bothered to answer. He just pulled open the front door and said flatly, "See yourself out." Buladimiru forcibly suppressed his anger and warned Genya not to hack into his phone again. Otherwise he would sue him. After saying that, he turned around and left. Genya stood by the window, watching his brother walk farther and farther away, and could only think, this life is unbearably boring. Kwon Taek-ju's nightmares, on the contrary, were becoming more and more exciting. He dreamed that just as he lay down, a gust of cold wind swept past his back. In the next second, that lunatic Jenya smashed through the window and broke in. Without saying a single word, he directly grabbed him by the throat. Then he murmured softly in his ear, "Days without toys are really boring." After saying that, he actually started playing cards as if nothing had happened. After being completely deceived and toyed with like a plaything by this out-of-control mafia lunatic, the little spy who had barely escaped with his life was left with a deep psychological shadow. At this moment he fell into a dream again. He dreamed that he had just lain down and was about to rest, but he could only watch helplessly as that lunatic broke through the window once more. The man was the same as ever, saying nothing before clamping his hand around his neck. He even said maliciously that after losing his toy, he was really bored. Before the words had even fully fallen, he devoured Kwon Taek-ju completely. Kwon Taek-ju was shaking with rage and suddenly jolted himself awake in anger. Only then did he realize it was a dream, but just as he let out a sigh of relief, he was shocked to discover that Ko Zejo was spirited to an absurd degree. He simply could not believe the scene before his eyes. He was so annoyed that he went straight to douse himself with cold water. Irritated, how could he dream of that guy, and why did he, of all things, have a physical reaction? Even in his dreams, he couldn't resist. That guy's power was too terrifying. So he was just glad he'd managed to come back alive. Kwon Taek-ju gritted his teeth and slammed a fist into the wall. He started plotting how to make Jenya suffer a bit. That guy's strength was absurdly great, practically inhuman. Just as he was thinking, Jenya's words suddenly flashed through his mind. His weakness was known only to himself. Yet in the end, he was still killed. Because after he was bewitched by a beauty, Kashiai's heart was hidden in that castle deep in the mountains. Kwon Taek-ju still remembered that guy. He didn't just tell the story of Kashiai. He also mentioned the story of Princess Anastasia, saying that according to legend, the princess was still alive. But before that, the man had clearly said Anastasia's development had failed. Yet if it had truly failed, why did the Bogdanov family that took part in the development still remain? Did Anastasia really vanish? Or is she living on in another form? When they went to see Borisu, that person verbally denied the development of Anastasia, but exchanged a very meaningful glance with Jenya. What on earth was that hinting at? And Jenya being called the man like a nuclear core. There was no way that title came without a reason. Kwon Taek-ju's brow furrowed ever more tightly, but the clues in his mind were gradually linking together. He suddenly felt as if he had caught on to something, and the next second he shut off the cold water. He stared at the ceiling and thought, the answer might be inside that castle. A ruthless, cold-blooded mafia, treating the little spy like a toy, tricking him, playing with him, and the little spy narrowly escaped with his life, but was left with wounds both physical and psychological. At this moment, Kwon Taek-ju was digging into Jenya's unknown secrets, and he made up his mind. He would make the other side pay. Soon he discovered that an old house owned by the Bogdanov family was no longer inhabited, and the trees around the house were about the same age as Koshiai. This matched perfectly with the folktale Jenya had mentioned. He immediately pulled out books and magazines. He began quickly searching for information on this residence. But what was most unsettling was this: in all the photos, there was one room where the light was on day and night, no matter what. Kwon Taek-ju felt his heart sink. He had found Koshiai's heart, which was the secret Jenya had been hiding all along. A moment later, carrying a stack of documents, Kwon Taek-ju returned to the hospital. Salma had already removed his bandages and was ready for discharge. Curious, he asked Kwon Taek-ju where he had just gone. But Kwon Taek-ju looked grim and asked Salma in return, "Are you really planning to give up the mission just like this?" Salma said he was already powerless to do anything. Kwon Taek-ju's emotions suddenly surged as he pressed him. If the mission could be completed, what benefits would you get? Salma was even more puzzled. Why was Kwon Taek-ju so excited? The next second, Kwon Taek-ju simply laid his cards on the table. As long as he got Anastasia's design drawings, he could obtain Chechnya's support. Salma and Jenya had known each other for a long time, because the Bear Country had been keeping an eye on Chechnya's movements. And at the same time, Salma was also in contact with the Cold Country and the Bald Eagle. No one could tolerate someone like that. She was a thorn in everyone's side, a knife in everyone's flesh. But this also meant that Kwon Taek-ju and Salma were fundamentally not from the same organization. So after getting the research and development blueprints, which side were they actually going to hand them over to? As Kwon Taek-ju thought, he lowered his voice to probe. If we capture Anastasia, what do you plan to do next? What answered him was the short gun Salma raised. Kwon Taek-ju's whole body jolted. freezing in an instant. He immediately recalled the cold, mocking line Genya had thrown out when she tried to kill him. I didn't expect your organization to send the wrong photo. Maybe you uncovered your superior's corruption, and they want to get rid of you first. It was as if Genya had been hinting at something, and Gwon Taek-ju had to get to the bottom of the truth. Forcing himself to calm down, he stared at Salma and asked, was this order given by the bald eagle or by the cold country? Salma slowly lowered the short gun, her eyes full of sympathy. It was an order from the cold country organization. A chill ran through Gwon Taek-ju's entire body. He had never imagined that the ones trying to kill him were actually his own people. This espionage mission directly screwed the handsome dark-skinned guy over to rock bottom. In order to get rid of him, his superiors actually sent him the enemy's photo. They even lied to him, saying that was his partner. And the enemy simply went along with the mistake, not only playing with him like a toy. He even gave a fake name, tricking him into calling the enemy darling hundreds of times. The moment the truth was revealed, Gwon Taek-ju held his head, irritably going through all the clues again. But compared to losing face and being deceived, what mattered more now was getting Salma to nod, agreeing to dig into Genya's secrets together. So he stayed unhurried, pushing the questions in layer by layer. That guy Pushi, at the banquet he hosted himself. He killed an important official, yet didn't receive any punishment at all. And he even leaked important intelligence to me without authorization. What do you think is the reason for that? Salma looked totally indifferent. Pushi is just that kind of lunatic. Besides, this intel might not even be important. Gwon Taek-ju immediately pressed him. What if it's research secrets belonging to 29? And North Korean technicians have already come over to handle the issue. As soon as these words fell, Salma's whole body jolted violently. He began to seriously think. Pushi really was acting off. Just to play a spy game with Gwon Taek-ju, he was actually willing to leak intel, and even went so far as to kill an important official. Gwon Taek-ju lowered his voice and gave his assessment. He's done so many things that violate the rules. He wasn't punished. Then there's only one possibility. He really is holding anesthesia. Salma was clearly stunned, but immediately retorted, impossible, right? Anesthesia has been under development for many years. Psyche isn't even 30 yet. How could the Bear Nation hand something like that over to him? Gwon Taek-ju didn't explain much. He just flicked a stack of documents over. Salma took the documents, as Gwon Taek-ju calmly added more details in her ear. This is the list of personnel involved in developing anesthesia, and every one of them was wiped out on the same day. They did all of this just to completely seal off the news that the development had failed. They also had to prevent other forces from continuing to develop that kind of weapon. On something at this level, who could possibly bear the responsibility? Salma was already convinced. He furrowed his brows, realizing that only the organization could step in to handle this, and Psyche just happened to be that special existence. He was the one holding the funding and connections for developing anesthesia. On top of that, he was the third son of the Bogdanov family, a deranged mafia heir who hadn't even realized he'd already fallen in love. Ever since he met that dark-skinned beauty, he'd been like a peacock in full display, clearly proud, yet still pretending to show off his achievements casually. For example, he'd collected an entire warehouse full of new model weapons. For example, he was in charge of developing the most powerful weapon, anesthesia. And for another example, he'd hidden the real secret in an ancient castle deep in the mountains. He is just like Koshii in the story. He personally revealed the secret to the beauty, and then waited for the beauty to discover it on her own. And Gwon Taek-ju did not disappoint him. He quickly deduced his secret and immediately got ready to go steal the house. At this moment, he was trying to persuade Salma to take action together. But Salma was very hesitant. Once the mission ended, the organization would no longer support them, and Gwon Taek-ju's injuries had not fully healed yet. The man, however, looked completely unconcerned. He said he didn't need support, and that his injuries had more or less recovered. Salma's tone grew more urgent. But the enemy already knows our identities, and the moment we show ourselves, we could be targeted at any time. What's more, we still don't know where Anastasia is. Just as Salma was anxiously voicing her worries, Gwon Taek-ju, however, said calmly that Psyche had already told him Anastasia's location. Salma was stunned on the spot, even wondering if she had misheard. Gwon Taek-ju casually took out the house's blueprints. He said that Psyche had told a story. On that vast expanse of land, only wild beasts could enter, and Koshii's heart was hidden in a treasure chest to the south. Bogdanov's residence happened to match those descriptions one by one, because here only those of the same kind can enter. And Psyche had also said at the banquet that no one who came here would be called a human, and he had felt something was off at the time. Looking back now, that was practically a blatant hint. And according to his investigation, there was an ancient tree in that castle, and its age was almost the same as Koshiai's. In the room to the south of the castle, the lights were on all year round, precisely corresponding to the place where Koshiai hid his heart. So Anastasia's blueprint was very likely right there. After hearing all this, Salma let out a cold snort and countered by asking on what grounds Pushi should leak secrets to Gwon Taekju. Gwon Taekju only said he wasn't sure either, but he could confirm one thing: Pushi would never lie. As soon as he finished speaking, he stood up and left, ignoring Salma, who was still hesitating. But Salma didn't want to miss this opportunity. He grabbed Gwon Taekju and said he wanted to act together with him. Gwon Taekju quickly took Salma and rushed to Jenya's Phase 5 base. At first, Salma didn't understand why they had come here. This place just looked like an abandoned book warehouse. Gwon Taekju didn't respond to his doubts, only lowering his head and wondering whether Jenya might have changed the password. As he thought, he keyed in those numbers from memory. From deep within the warehouse came at once the screech of metal scraping against concrete. Salma cautiously raised his pistol, but in the next second, he was stunned by the scene before his eyes. The secret room was actually filled with the latest model weapons. Gwon Taekju, however, clenched his fist even tighter, his face darkening. Jenya hadn't changed the password at all, which was simply looking down on him. The next second, he showed no courtesy at all and directly took the weapon away. Immediately after, he shifted his gaze toward the surveillance camera in the corner. With a provocative air, he made a friendly gesture at the lens. The moment his hand dropped, he fired without hesitation and shattered the camera with a single shot. Meanwhile, far away, Jenya still had no idea that Gwon Taekju had done these adorable things. No matter how ferocious and ruthless the Blackguard Party is, they can still be dazzled by beauty and hand over their most important secrets to a little spy. At this moment, that little spy was leading her partner to go straight in and rob the house. But Bogdanov's residence was guarded so tightly that not even a drop of water could get through. They had no choice but to take a gamble and squeeze in through the rapidly flowing drainage pipe. A moment later, Gwon Taekju panted and murmured under his breath that he had just survived one more time. Fortunately, the oxygen tank jammed the propeller. Otherwise, they would have long since been sliced in half. Next, the two of them immediately divided up the tasks. Gwon Taekju was responsible for sneaking into the castle from the garage. But as soon as he pulled open the garage door, he ran head-on into a guard. Gwon Taekju's heart jolted, and he was instantly so annoyed he wanted to curse. The next second, he suddenly burst into action and knocked the man out cold. At the same time, Salma activated the Sky Eye device. She immediately informed Gwon Taekju and released mechanical insects to scout the path for him. Thanks to this, Gwon Taekju avoided the servants and guards pacing back and forth. He slipped silently into the conference room. He had to find the underground tunnel that Jenya had previously led him through. But he had no time to slowly look for the mechanism and could only forcefully cut open the floor. But at the very second he jumped into the tunnel, a shrill alarm suddenly blared inside the castle. Gwon Taekju was a little nervous. His mind was spinning rapidly as he desperately searched for an exit, wanting only to reach that last room on the 3rd floor as fast as possible. He quickly found a rope and tried giving it a hard pull. The door in front of him actually opened. He froze. Suddenly, a study appeared before his eyes. This was that last room on the 3rd floor. Whether day or night, its light was always on. Gwon Taekju immediately became alert, shut the door tightly, and pulled the curtains closed as well. In the next second, he was about to look for the switch of the chandelier. But suddenly, chaotic noises came from outside the door. The guards were searching the rooms one by one. Gwon Taekju knew there was no time. He raised his pistol and shot the chandelier to pieces, and at the very moment the room was plunged into darkness, Gwon Taekju's pupils shrank sharply. In that instant, he finally understood why this room had to keep its light on and why the curtains were never allowed to be closed. He also finally understood the words Jenya had said after wringing him completely dry. Koshiai's heart might be in the jewel box, or it might not be there at all. It turned out that only in darkness would Anastasia's design diagrams and calculation formulas emerge in this room.